Okay, we're live.
Thank you. Morning, folks at home. Morning, council. This is a special budget meeting, April 14th, 2023. We have most of council here. We have regrets from Councillor Joe Finney. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered today in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral presence and people territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Today we gather with the intent to follow the living peace and friendship treaties with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. We call to order. We have an agenda in front of you, Council. What's your wish?
Moving through the agenda.
Moved by Councillor Now, seconded by Councillor Calvert. The agenda on the question. All in favor? It is approved. Budget presentation for 2023-2024. We have our manager of finance, Ashley, with us today. Over to you, Ashley.
Thank you. All right. I am excited for this. The accountant in me is ready. Okay, so the CAO will be here momentarily. So he pops on in. He's coming. He's going to actually go over some of the capital stuff. That's more his baby. So we kind of divided and conquered for this. But I have to say, I am so excited to present this. I'm happy with this budget. There's some ups and downs, but I think overall you'll be happy. I hope, maybe. All right, so let's get into it. All right, I'm working off of 2 computers. So everybody at home, please forgive me if I look a little frazzled. So the budget summary. So basically the summary is showing the revenue and the operating expenses for the town of Bay. It doesn't include the capital in this section. So we're forecasting a budget revenue of 3.8. Last year for the budget, we thought we forecasted 3.1 and we came in around 3.2. Now, just remember, if I talk about anything about prior year's actual, these are unaudited numbers. So there's still a chance that these are going to change once we go through audit. We just finished our 21-22 audit. So we still, in our 22-23 audit is coming up in June. So we should know what our numbers are, but just keep in mind that these are unaudited. Okay, so we're looking at 3.8 on the revenue side and the operating expenses, 3.3. Prior year, we budgeted 2.8. So you'll notice that revenue's gone up, but also so have expenses. I think that's to be expected. We're looking at a surplus of 131 for the end of the budget year. And our actual for 21-22 with the audited numbers, we actually ended up having a budget of 261 or a surplus of 261. I'm sorry. So are there any questions on this?
Are you able to talk about what, because not everybody can see the detail on the screen, what's like the increase in the other?
Yeah, I'll go through that in each tab so that it'll make a little more sense. This is more of a summary of the tabs that are coming. And then if you want me to go in even more detail, I can. So no, it's a good point. Then we have our capital expenses. So this is basically just showing you how much we are planning to spend at 4.5. Last year, our capital expenses were a lot higher than we budgeted for. We didn't get to a lot of the projects for numerous reasons. We only spent around 2.9, again, unaudited, but we're looking at about 4.5. And the CAO is going to go through sort of what those capital expenditures are a little later.
Including the ones we didn't get to.
Some of them are carried forward. Not all of them are carried forward, I believe. I think it just depends on the needs of, needs change throughout the year and what projects we've decided are required. So we also have updated, Dylan has updated the 10-year schedule wonderfully. So we'll get to that again, but it's a much more solid schedule than what we've had in the past. And it'll give you a good insight on where we're planning on in the future. So, but we'll get to all of this. So this is basically just a summary. I'm not going to go through the charts. They're pretty, but they're pretty self-explanatory.
Can you make them any bigger?
I don't know.
On your right, there's a magnifying glass and the border. It doesn't work for us.
You guys are, hold on.
We can't use it. But
Yeah, I have to move. I think
Have to
it's
get the
this
PDF.
Are you on your own?
No.
Oh,
That's all
I-
right.
that's why.
What if I just do this? Does that help?
Yeah.
Yes, that helps a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just let me know if I need to make it a little bigger. I'm pretty used to these numbers, so just yell at me if you need to see something. So these are prior year's assessment rates, so the residential, commercial, and last year for the first time, we broke out the long-term care facility as a separate line, just so that we could see exactly the magnitude of that specific project. So going down to this year,
That's the new long-term facility.
for last year, yeah, the new one.
Yeah, not the.
Yes, sorry, yes, the new one. So this year, I am proposing that we keep the residential and the commercial the same at 1.115 and 3.055. We are looking to increase the fire tax rate to 0.209, which is about a 25% increase over prior year. We are running a deficit with the fire. I think it would come to no surprise that now that we've built, our beautiful building and our hall, that, there's payments to be made and there's expenses to be incurred now. So we'll go all into that, but that is certainly increasing the expense side and, creating a deficit on the fire side. But I will show you in detail exactly what that is and why I think we should increase it. And you guys all saw this, and whoever's watching at home, if they joined us for the meeting a couple of weeks ago, the only difference in the change in assessment is that you guys requested that I break out the long-term care facility, which I think makes total sense. So that's been broken out on here, but everything else is status quo on here.
Ashley, could you say again what the fire tax rate is proposed?
2.209.
0.209, thank you.
Yeah.
Up from 0.167.
Yeah.
So 25%.
And this was planned from before, I believe.
So I
So-
can, I can. make a
yeah.
comment on that. Sorry, everyone, I'm just popping up on the camera after being late. I apologize. A couple of things kept me late this morning. But as far as the fire tax rate, we had projections, obviously without knowing where assessment growth would take us. So former manager of finance had done up some projections, and the projections that had actually been presented at that time were for a higher fire tax rate than we're recommending here. And I think in our discussions with council last year, the thought is that there'll be an intersection of natural assessment growth with an increasing rate. And so rather than pushing the rate right up to where it would need to be immediately to make these payments exclusively with the fire, you'll see that this year at this rate increase and with the growth in assessment, the fire deficit will still impact on our general operating. But if we increase if assessment grows next year, we can look at what that final fire tax rate would actually need to be to cover costs within the fire rate. So jumping it up all the way to there this year wouldn't account for the fact that there is still expected growth in assessment next year, including the completion of the long-term care facility.
How about the other communities that we cover? What's their fire rates that, does it go by their own district? Do they vote for what they will pay for fire services, or do they take our rate?
So we tell them what our rate is expected to be. In 2 of the 3 areas, they don't have a local vote. So it just goes through the municipality district of Lunenburg. And then in 1 of them, in Mater's Cove, they have a fire commission, so they have to vote to accept the continuation of services with Mahone Bay. And that typically happens in May of each year, because when they have their AGM. So their rate is all 3 areas has been the same at 11 cents for quite some time now, for at least a few years now. And I think we would want to have a conversation about increasing the rate next year. As their assessments have also continued to grow, it makes sense to keep an eye on how that is growing naturally and bringing additional revenue to the department's bottom line naturally through assessment growth in those areas, just like it is in town. But we probably do want to give a fair lead time of letting them know about a possible increase. So there is still the choice to make an increase effective this year. But I guess our recommendation in that regard is to communicate that there would be an expected increase of some nature next year. It's been a long time. And it doesn't have to be from a full cent. Like if you look at ours, it's actually gotten an additional decimal point in there now. So it doesn't have to go from 11 to 12, but at the same time that, might be appropriate at this point.
I'm just wondering what the components of the almost 50% increase in commercial assessment is. Somebody built something on it.
So there's, yeah, part of it is due to actual events, but that's only 4.83, that's the top part. The 6.9 million is growth and assessment, so if you look at, that's not actually new construction, that's just changes in the assessed value of existing construction. And so what happened was 2 years ago, it plummeted due to the way that they do assessment on
Oh,
commercial.
because they do it on revenue.
Yeah, they do it on retail revenue. So it's coming back now. It's actually still not back to pre-COVID levels, but by next year it probably will be, presuming people are here.
And the rate that Dylan was referring to that Luke presented was 2.31. So, or 0.231, sorry. It was a lot more than what we thought. So just kind of an idea of where he kind of predicted to be and where we think we should start right now.
And we'll probably be somewhere between where we are now and there next year, but
Yep.
the long-term care facility does have its full assessment coming online in the next assessment year.
Exactly. So this one is basically showing the change in funds for the year. So we're gonna get into this more when we look at the capital expenditures to have a better idea. This is just a summary page. It'll make more sense further on. You see right here, this is a breakout, a little more detail of what I just showed you above. So it's showing the funds based on that are being funded by the surplus. And then we had our meeting a month ago, a couple weeks ago, where we trued up the reserve balance for the opening for this year. So these numbers are a lot better looking than they have in the past. So they're much more reliable. We're happy with them. So then you can see, you know, what it's costing us, what income is going in. You'll notice that we have a rec reserve in there now for 15,000. You guys passed a motion on that a couple meetings ago. And we received 271,000 on March 31st. So that's why it's in the opening balance, because technically it was last year for sustainable service growth. So, yeah.
And just a couple quick notes on this page. The Athletic and Cultural Trust was the subject of a motion on Tuesday night, but that's not captured here. So there would be an expense of that amount in the budget based on council's direction at the last meeting. So that will empty that reserve. And then actually, we just want to scroll up slightly.
Yeah.
I know we'll get to the detailed fire separately, but I just wanted
sorry.
to note. Thank you. So the projected town operating fund balance here, which is showing expenses. These expenses would not, you know, normally we're presenting on a surplus for town, right? So it's either going to be zero or surplus. The surplus is in the income columns, that's town general surplus, but the estimated expenses there represent the fire deficit that spills over.
Mhm.
So that's where you're seeing, if we leave the fire rates as proposed at the 0.209, then the town operating fund takes that hit, and the resulting balance of the town operating fund based on the projected surplus in town general operations, so deficit on fire, surplus in general, is the resulting number there at the end of 370,000. That's seeing how it will impact through to the fund balances, and we'll get to the actual general and fire documents later.
Councillor Winston?
Thank you. Does the negative number on the water operating fund reflect the deficit in the actual operation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason it's there rather than, I was just explaining with fire, because fire represents an expense to general rather than a deficit, yeah.
So,
Oh, sorry.
since trying to digest that piece, so
Yeah.
in the third column, I estimate income. So there's a deficit, a larger deficit expected.
Yeah, so water is definitely in a situation there due to the capital work that was done last year being reflected here. So at our meeting 2 weeks ago, when we talked about the balance of the reserves, one of the things we talked about was how to reflect the capital spending if we were going to go to borrowing. So this is still a decision to be made by council, that the proceeds of that borrowing would come back into the water operating fund. So I think we were looking at borrowings at something about 380,000, something like that. So if we do that, then the water operating fund will be restored. And when you get to the water in the actuals, you'll see there was about $400,000 of capital out of revenue that was reflected there.
I'm still a bit confused because it says it's an operating fund, but you're talking about capital expense. So maybe I'm too naive.
So the capital out of revenue is this good. These are all good questions,
Yeah.
especially the people watching on too. The capital out of revenue is normally during a year we would pull from reserves and borrowing to cover capital. But often the borrowing lags that. It happens the following year. So it will stay in operating unless we either transfer something from a reserve to cover it or we borrow. And we didn't show the transfer from reserve. If you look down on this page, the water depreciation reserve has a larger balance than the funds deficit projection. So it actually would be possible to just cover this from the 347,000 in the water depreciation reserve. But then we'd essentially have an almost drained reserve and an almost drained operating fund. So our recommendation would be to borrow for that. But that's the decision yet to be made by council. So that's kind of how you see it reflected here.
And just for clarity, that $400-some thousand is the money we had to expend to get the nursing home the hookup they needed on time.
Yes, although it shouldn't for anyone watching be characterized as just that. It also represents about 500 meters. It is a substantial amount of raw water line and water main that were replaced and upgraded, and a new pressure reducing valve chamber. So there were a lot of things done that benefit the community in addition to McLeod, and what they covered did certainly represent at least their direct costs.
No, but I guess what I was getting at, it was all about the timing, because normally that would have been done with a provincial assist.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we ended up paying roughly about 55%, between 55 and 60% of the cost, rather than we had projected on paying 27 if it had been provincially funded.
And in many ways, it is something we were planning to do. It's just that the timing did not work.
Well,
out
and
for us.
in actual fact, if you'll see when we get the capital, the intention is to complete the rest of the project that now has lined up appropriate external funding. It just didn't come along in time for that work.
But just a minute, just want to check with the mayor. Are you hearing us well today?
Yes, I do hear you well, although there is still a bit of a muffled muteness to the volumes that are in the room. And I suspect it's because of the way the microphones are situated in that room that the problem is being created.
Mm. Well, just give us a shout if you can't hear what you're saying. And it's important.
Okay,
Okay, thanks.
just hanging on every word.
Good.
Excellent.
I know you all probably couldn't sleep last night with excitement to come in today and talk numbers. So
It's hard.
yeah. So, okay, so we're looking at the revenue tab. So this is the revenue for the town. We're at budgeting for the assessment around 2.9. Last year it was 2.2. Again, the unaudited came in around the same. So you do see an increase in the assessment revenue. Infrastructure charges have basically, oh my goodness. Sorry, I don't have a mouse on this computer. I'm useless without a mouse. Infrastructure charges have basically stayed the same for the year. Deed transfer tax, I've increased it slightly. We've been budgeting about 180 for the last couple of years, but we've surpassed that each year. So I've tried to. Oh, thank you. Please hold. You are a nice man. Wait, do I have a hole for it?
I know how it feels not having enough.
Oh my gosh.
Nothing worse.
Thank you.
My computer.
I'll always next time.
I don't know if it's working. I'm gonna switch up mine now. You've inspired me. So, like I was saying about the deed transfer tax, I bumped it up about $50,000 just because I think that's a little bit more reflective on where the revenue is going. Again, we've done 180 for the last couple of years. This computer does not want me to use a mouse.
And I guess just ultimately, while she's doing that, a comment on the deed transfer tax, because it does map directly to capital reserve. If we're off in that projection, it is only with respect to understanding how much funding is available for capital projects. That doesn't affect the operating. And so the last number of years, we've projected low and run significantly higher, and that's only been to the benefit of the capital reserve balance.
That's right. There's not much change on this sheet. And then our funds, not much going on here. Dividend from area. So we're projecting that we are not going to receive a dividend this year. So I wanted to budget for worst case scenario, of course. I've spoke to Aaron about it several times, and I think 0 is appropriate for where we're at right now. So unfortunately, we don't have that source, but it is what it is at this point.
I know a significant amount of returns have come back to fund town infrastructure from the Ellis House project over the last number of years, so.
Yes, absolutely. This isn't a common thing, but this is sort of the product of where we're at. Gas tax rebate, we're looking at about receiving the 85,000. Sorry, Penny?
I do have a question, but it's back a couple of screens.
Okay,
Just about the deed transfer tax.
yes.
I don't understand the figures in that line. If the actual for 21, 22. Oh, so okay, so the budget for 22, 23 was 180.
Mhm. We came in around
Unaudited
337.
was what are those two figures? The difference between the budget and the unaudited?
So you mean, what does that represent?
Yeah.
So the budgeted amount, 180, was quite conservative, and
Yes.
having come in significantly over it.
Significantly
3%,
over.
And
Okay,
since this is a revenue line, that means more money came in than you expected.
right, okay, so why are we budgeting 230,000?
I was just looking at several years trend, and 180 is very conservative, and I think that we can, it's safe to bump it up to 230. I believe we're going to probably go over that, but again, keeping a conservative approach, I wanted to make sure. So I'm just basically, because we've been budgeting 180, we've come in 300,000 in the last couple of years, so I thought it was appropriate to bump that up slightly, but I didn't want to, again, you want to stay conservative on the revenue side, so I bumped it up 50,000, and I'm confident we'll reach that, if not more.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And just to be clear, the reason, which I wasn't really clear on before, but because it doesn't really matter to the operating revenue because it all goes straight to capital anyway. So in terms of inflating or not inflating our
Yeah.
operating budget, it has no impact.
And I think last year we agreed to be conservative rather than be.
Absolutely,
the budget.
absolutely, but I want to be conservative but realistic, so that's why I increased it slightly, but I didn't want to. Better to be conservative.
To have more money than you think, not less.
Yeah, exactly, right? Plan for the worst, and
Makes me nervous.
so we're looking at total revenue around 3.8 million. Last year we budgeted for 3.1. We came in unaudited around 3.2. So revenue has gone up this year. Don't get too excited because expenses are also going up. So it's never just one-sided, unfortunately. So are there any questions?
It is one-sided, it's the expense side.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So are there any questions on the revenue?
The percentage increase in revenue on the operating line is how much? It's 3.8 versus 3.2?
Yeah.
Arithmetic in my head. I can't.
Yeah, I think that's the summary side is.
It's 18 or 19%, something like that.
Okay, so now we're going to the expense side. So one thing we wanted to do with COVID's still here, but we're trying to push it away. We want to try to get back to, conferences are coming back in person, travel is coming back, people are moving around more. We want to try to get to the pre-COVID expenses. And so if you look right here under the mayor's expenses, council's counselors' expenses, committees' expenses, and you'll see further down the CAO's expenses. We've tried to reflect from 2 years ago exactly what it is. So there is a jump in the expenses, but it's because of COVID. Everything just, fell off and everyone stayed home and there were no expenses. So these are much more reflective of where we believe the expenses will be this year, since everything is sort of trying to get back to normal. For remuneration, we're going to go into closed session for this, but we are looking at a 7.6 CPI increase. I've tied that to the government reporting December 2022. Nova Scotia was at 7.6. I know I've talked to other municipalities and they're actually going higher than 7.6. I think I'm comfortable at 7.6 based on everything I looked at. Kelly's laughing at me. So I did want to put that in there, that's how I derive this amount. And I feel I've done enough research on it, but obviously council will be the deciding factor. So we'll go into closed session, I believe, next time where we talk about salaries. Councillor Wilson asked for a detailed breakout of every individual, where they're at now, we're supposed to be with CPI, if there's any raises, that type of thing. So I have that and we'll provide it next week or whenever the next time we meet. So I won't say too much on the salary side, just for obvious reasons. Before I go to the next one, the Newtown logo, it's a hot and heavy issue and we're budgeting 25,000. So it's a carry forward from prior year. And I'm sure we're going to come up with something. I'm sure the town's going to come up with something beautiful and wonderful and everybody will be happy. And so that's our budget for it.
And before you move off that one,
Yeah.
There's a missing note there, which we can add back in later, but just with respect to MJSB HR services, just wanted to comment on the projected increase there. And you'll see that again when we get to the operating initiatives. So there is an amount in there, 15,000 in there as a projected completion of the update of our human resources manual. Council talked about that quite a bit last year. I put it in this category. We're still not actually sure if MJSB HR will be at a place where that type of service is something that we can have through that organization. They're substantially increasing their capacity this year, that's the plan. But either way, it would be something that I guess we've acknowledged we need a contracted resource to get us over the hump. A lot of good work was done last year with the former town clerk, but I think that's our way of trying to make sure that that doesn't linger.
Yeah, so if it's not MJSB for whatever reason, I think we need something. So I think that's a fair estimate to put on the line either way.
What kind of services do you get with that?
So with MJSB specifically, Dylan, did you wanna?
Yeah, so we're actually not a member of the HR service. The cost is the full cost of the service is split between the town of Bridgewater and the municipality district of Lunenburg. And then they've established an hourly rate for the services there for us to access. So now that they're increasing capacity, there is a possibility that they will have the capacity for us to become a full partner in that service. They've really struggled to keep up with the demand of HR services from the other two units, and that's basically why they're increasing their capacity with another employee this year. So we may add into that, but at the current time, we access it just on an hourly rate basis. So it's typically been for things like there was a shared performance management project that all three units participated in 2 years ago. And so that's the sort of thing which we kind of just pick and choose which projects we have worked with them on. But potentially later this year, the council may be presented with they've now attained a higher level of capacity, and would the town be interested in becoming, more of a partner in that service going forward?
So if you look right here, 0.7 right here, our insurance has gone up slightly. To be honest, the quote that they provided me versus the bill that the contract they actually gave us was less. So I was really excited. So I was actually budgeting for more of an expense. So, but this is the actual cost. Now this is going to be spread over all the different units, kind of like the audit cost and IT, HR, all that stuff. We've spread over all the units to share it equally and what we think is a good divide for all that. So You'll see this pop up in other areas, but it didn't increase as much as I was planning, so for me,
Took a huge hit last year.
yeah, exactly.
But I mean, that was part of, it took a huge hit last year. I should say, when we were watching, that was.
Well, we added cyber insurance too last
So yeah, we
year.
also added facilities. We
Yes.
added the new fire.
Exactly,
So it
so,
was, actually insuring more stuff is gonna be.
yeah, so I feel like we're actually starting to stable off now, which is great, especially when it comes to expenses. Okay, so, let's see where else we're at here. So, if you go down to telephone and internet, we're looking at, there's gonna be 4 cell phones, we believe, based on a 3-year turnover of cell phones. If they need to be replaced, I believe 4 need to be replaced this year coming. It's 2 would be under here, general government services, so that was like a admin team, the finance team, that type of thing. 2 is in public works, you'll see that later. It's about $1,000 per phone. Again, this is only, like, Dylan's phone needs to be replaced, his is taped together. So although I appreciate him trying to save money, he probably needs a new phone. But if your phone hasn't been dropped a million times like mine does, I don't see any reason to replace it, but I just wanted to put that in worst case scenario. These phones are coming up and probably need to be replaced.
It's not the kind of large item that would necessarily warrant notice. I think it's just that it's not a capital item. It doesn't meet our capitalization threshold. So
Yeah,
it's reflected here, but it's not an ongoing expense.
yeah, exactly. And it'll change. So,
Excuse me, this is a small item, but I'm just wondering why, fuel for town hall is $7,500 when we basically run on these, what do you call them, heat pumps?
So we still do have, and that's actually a great segue to the capital budget when we get there, we still do actually have a oil burner a boiler in this building. So the cost of oil having increased the way that they did, I think we saw the actual last year at 73, so we just put it up accordingly. Now, if council does approve the electrification of the boiler system here, which is in the capital budget, then actually this fuel cost will be eliminated within the first quarter. Hopefully, we'll get right on that. But that's still, we were just reflecting based on last year's actual.
No, I guess that's my question though, is what we're budgeting now looks fine compared to 2020, 21, 22. But it makes, to me, no sense that we're using any if we're running everything with electricity. Why is the boiler running at all?
Well, so part of the building, the back part doesn't have heat pumps and is still heated.
Oh, okay.
So that's certainly part of it.
Okay.
And then I'm not sure in the winter if I think some of the building still does, like, to get over a really cold night, like a couple of nights we had this winter, really does still require the boiler to run.
yeah, so I have baseboards in my office, and when we had those really cold nights, Jonathan turned them on to make sure, because our
Okay,
units
so
can't keep
these-
up.
These
with it.
don't work at night probably at all, let's turn it. Okay, that's all. Good.
Okay.
On the same page, I have a question about town legal.
Yep,
And, I mean, given some of the stuff we might not get into, was wondering whether that amount is.
So usually it's a very small amount, yeah. This really is only covers like lookups and stuff like that. Usually legal is gonna be put to the project or area, so
Yeah.
there's a fair bit of legal and regulatory expense in electrical.
Okay.
Which is where we expect most of it, but yeah, so that's why this really just is, day-to-day lookups, properties, things for like the heritage, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
okay, so the audit line. We do have an increase in fees this year, so it's increased by about $30,000 on the base, as well as we're increasing it on the otoscope. So for the town, we're doing 39.6 this year. Last year was 28. The theory behind this, and I've spoken to our auditors many times over this, and is basically our audit is a little more complex than some towns. We have a couple utilities, we have some things going on, and it's just taking longer than expected. Now, this fee obviously can be adjusted in future years, and but for now, for next year, this is what we think is going to take based on the hours for the last several years. The other thing is the hope is that we have the proper fee up front. This will also cover any of the hours that are out of scope, so that we're not gonna get hit with a bill. I'd rather know how much it's gonna cost us in the entirety up front than all of a sudden see a bill for an extra $30,000 and not have that budgeted for. So this is the intent, to try and really understand how much our audit costs us and what it's going to cost us coming up. Our audit is going to be earlier this year. It's going to be starting in a couple of months. So it's all very exciting stuff, but you will see it has increased, but I think that it's reasonable why they want to increase it. And I much prefer to, like I said, put it in the budget and have that expense higher than hopefully and not get hit with another expense further along.
What happened in 21-22 with that 52,000 figure?
So that would have just been out of scope.
That was just all out
Yeah.
of scope for that.
And in the prior year, it looks like we came in on budget, but the budget figure included additional controls work that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So in fact, we only came in on budget because the audit
We had
costs were
budgeted
by the same. amount.
$30,000.
We didn't
Yeah.
do that other work.
So the internal controls project that we will eventually bring to council is about a $30,000 project. And I think it's important to do because, we've had some issues in the past on inventory controls and that type of thing. And I can do an analysis on our team, but it's always better to have someone come in and look at it with a fresh set of eyes. And exactly. So they quoted us about $30,000 probably like 6-7 months ago. I think that's still the same. So, but yeah, that's why it kind of looked like we came in, but we were over.
We wouldn't do the internal controls piece till after the annual audit this year.
Oh, yeah.
So
forget
is
the
that
other.
budgeted for?
Yes, the 30,000. Yeah, and it's in the capital, or it's in the special.
Yeah,
operating
it's
initiative.
detailed on the special operating initiative.
Yeah, but it
it's
is in the, yeah, exactly. And then MJSP IT services have gone up. They provide us a quote every year. So this is just the cost, the proportionate cost of their IT services. I think everything's just getting more expensive. They're expecting the more demand on them from us. So yeah, it's gone up, but I think that that's to be expected with the service.
It's quite high.
It is. It's gone up quite a lot.
It has an increase of about 40% in staffing levels over the last 2 years.
And they're in a new facility as well.
Yeah, they're.
Yeah. But I think they're expecting more from us. We're getting new systems, we're adding new modules. I think that
The support is certainly great, but there's no question the cost has increased.
oh yeah, it's costing us a
Council
lot.
ever does want to have a presentation about MJSP IT services, cost and service.
Mhm.
I'm sure that Leslie and Lisa from MJSP would be more than happy to do it. So that might be something, where you see these costs increasing. And Joe, who's our resident expert on it, because he's of course on the financial committee for MJSP, is not here this morning, but I'm sure they'd be happy to come to a future meeting to talk to that as well.
And keep in mind, this expense is spread over many of the departments. So this 45 is just for the general.
Yeah, that's not the full.
That's not the full cost. You'll see the full cost in total, yeah.
Exactly. So when I look at it, it says it's 5%
Yeah.
increase. You've not put a note on it. So to me, in many ways, sort of as a resident, not as a councillor, I would be asking, why are you paying so much now? A 65% increase in 1 year is quite
Substantial.
And so
Yeah.
there needs to be a rationale around what exactly is bumping that up to some extent.
Okay, I can certainly reach out to them and.
Well, you can put a note in here, like that's a good idea to put a note.
Yeah, the note should probably be in there.
Oh, we'll get a note for you. Yeah, sometimes you see like on the same page, 300% increase in something, but it's they're smaller items, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I appreciate all these tips because as I was saying to Dylan, you look at this so much and then it just becomes I know it all that it's great to have people who's looking at fresh to kind of, we should have a note here. We should have a little explanation. So All right, so we go down here, the CAO expenses have gone up. That's the same thing as with the council expenses, committee expenses. We're looking to budget it for a more pre-COVID expense. We expect Dylan to be out and about a little bit more. So that's why that's gone up. And the final page, so if you look at the total operating expenses, we're looking at 849. And prior year, we budgeted 623, we came in around 586, again unaudited, but so our expenses have gone up. I think that is to be expected. Any further questions on this section?
Something's off with the headings on the top line there. We wanna look at that.
Something off of the heading?
Yeah, it's got under other general administrative services, it should have those two subheadings are dropped down a line.
Oh, that's what you mean.
Oh, yeah.
Formatting issue.
Yeah. Nope, this is
And
good.
I don't know, but presumably there would be a note, I guess, to the deputy mayor's point here, we have another item that's.
Yeah, the fire,
Significantly.
yeah, okay, yep.
And
Some of that grants is supposed to be 45, that's where it's dropped down,
Yeah, that's actually,
that's a big jump.
So that,
zero.
I don't, I'm not sure about what this is.
the 45?
Yeah, do you have a breakdown of it?
Well, isn't that the new 25,000?
We'll have to come back to that, sorry, I'm not sure if that would reflect here. When we get to the.
Yeah, it ties to the grants, it ties to the grant section.
It's the grants
Oh,
from 10 up to 45.
well, it wouldn't be fire department grants.
Like, so-
No, it's grants to organizations.
Yeah, so they're switched, they're totally switched, okay, yeah, so that's what. it
Yeah,
is.
that's what it is, so
Okay,
they're,
sorry about that.
yeah, this is on me, that's.
So they're not just dropped down, they're also reversed. I
Yeah,
guess, okay.
So,
So grants organizations, we'll talk, and there is a lot of explanation, and we'll totally talk about it, and maybe we just need a note here where people can find. That's actually one of the very last parts of the presentation this morning, and I can totally speak to why it's increased so much when we get there. And obviously, the council may want to knock that back down, because last year I was asked to with recommended grant amounts, and we got quite a lot of grant requests, so I had to come up with some recommended amounts, but when we get there, obviously,
Yeah,
council has some
it's-
discretion.
it's like
There's
double.
one particularly big one.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. I'm just testing to make sure you're all awake today.
It threw me off way more than it should have. I couldn't figure out what I was.
No,
doing.
you're right.
Looking at the fire department getting $45,000, it sounds pretty good.
The RCMP, we did receive the bill for this year, so it is 402,000.
And there's an ongoing discussion, just because people probably have
Yeah.
heard the news about RCMP prior year retro pay increases. So we purchase our services through the province, and they have tried not to do that type of retro downloading, so we have seen quite substantial increase over the last couple of years. It's hard to know whether that has to some extent buffered us against the downloading of the entire retroactive cost to us. Everybody got directly serviced through the municipal policing service agreement to the federal level has already been billed directly for the retro, and you've seen some of those amounts quoted in the media. We don't know yet, and it will probably be some time before the province decides how to handle that with respect to the passing on of costs under the provincial police services agreement.
So we didn't find it appropriate to
So this
even
is-
guess.
Yeah, this
What it
isn't
might
isn't
cost us.
reflective of it, but we don't know
Don't.
quite what it will be.
Well, it's very, as you know, I'm sure Cumberland has just gone out from RFP and request for proposals of some sort of policing, so. Becoming a very delicate situation.
Yeah. The other addition for this year is a noise bylaw enforcement officer, so I've added that line in the bottom. We've,
So the idea isn't that this person would be a noise bylaw enforcement officer, but
they would be
essentially
the
that
whole,
in order to step up to retaining enough bylaw capacity to do effective after hours enforcement, we're looking at having a new employee. The thought here is that it would probably be a full-time employee working at the beginning, being trained by Al, and then, maybe somebody who would be available to do after hours call outs, which our current bylaw enforcement officer, who's very experienced, has a very limited availability to us. So that's what's here, and we were asked to reflect the cost in the budget for adding this new service.
So the, currently the bylaw enforcement officer is getting around 10, 11,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're planning on the new one getting 38 roughly.
Yeah, basically it's like a starting wage and salary
So
combined.
that's going to.
So we have them both, not just one?
Yeah, also Al is, he's only working, I think it's 12 hours a week now. So Al he's a former inspector with the province, has a ton of background, and is very good at overseeing how we do bylaw enforcement and ensuring that we're set up to prosecute if necessary and that kind of thing. But ultimately, we'd be looking at somebody who doesn't, at this rate, at this cost, have any real background. So at least for this year, and Al will at some point probably also be ready to fully retire. We'd love to get the benefit of having him supervising and training a new
Yeah.
employee.
So this one would have considerably more hours. We don't almost.
So this will be a little
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
Because in order to have someone coming in after hours,
Yeah.
you have to. Yeah, I mean, we could try to get someone who only comes in after hours, but we've done that with other jobs and they often don't,
Yeah.
So cover.
In fact, am I missing something in terms of salary? Typical salaries at 37.8 seems low for a full-time position to me, but.
I mean, I guess it depends on what the starting
Yeah.
rate is. I'm not expecting we're getting somebody here who has a lot of experience. I'm thinking this is just somebody who's willing to work and live locally and can come in after hours, so.
And keep in mind too, that if, Al does decide to retire or whatever, this person would be taking on Al's portion as well and likely be.
Yeah, so they can.
Onboarding that.
in a role
Yeah,
in place.
Exactly, so they would be compensated for that new additional role as well.
So it's a proposal
Question?
here, and obviously council's still
Yeah.
debating whether to enact a new bylaw that would associate with
Let
that.
me ask a question first, yeah?
Yes, I do. When would you see the position beginning? In particular, when will the decision be presented to council to hire or not to hire this incremental person?
My understanding is that we were directed to come back with a noise bylaw by the next meeting of council on the 27th, the next regular meeting. So presumably within that meeting or the following one, a decision around that will be made, and then I would say that comes back to council's doing the budget simultaneously, and that will be how you determine whether the budget is going to include this item.
Okay, so we'd likely be 3 months into the fiscal year anyway.
That is true. In terms of actually approving a
Yeah.
bylaw, it would take some time. I mean, ideally, if council says we're gonna go down this route, we would advertise, we would be ready, but yeah, we wouldn't hire someone until the bylaw is adopted, because of course there'd be a public process and nothing is guaranteed.
Okay, and does the bylaw approval process include the staffing increment approval, or is that a separate issue?
So I mean, the budget approval would be the staffing, would be included in the budget. If council wants to make the dialogue about noise to be representative of that cost, then we can end up saying, well, we don't do it, we don't spend that cost. But I think it's really council's discretion to associate the noise bylaw process with a hiring, like we won't hire until council's determined that process has warranted it. But
Yep.
I wouldn't say it's entirely to say this is just a noise bylaw costs $37,000 a year. It's not quite that direct.
Thank you.
Councillor Cover.
So for this budget year, the figure would actually be less than 37.8.
Hmm.
Is that right? Because
Yeah,
we're only
yeah.
anticipating really 6 months of this fiscal year.
Yeah, we didn't really try to
Yeah.
factor that in. I mean, essentially, when a bylaw is enforced, we need it to be enforced. And so we do need to try to line it up, because I expect that very first week after that bylaw is enacted, that we'll be getting a lot of calls.
And so in my presumption is that we probably even would want to be proactive and bring that person in before the bylaw actually gets approved, because so they have the training or.
I mean, it's all the council's discretion, but at the very least, we should be having ads out. We
Yeah.
should be ready to.
Yeah.
Okay,
Just a quick one, I forgot to mention this in terms of the headings on page 15, I think there is something off with the headings too.
Page 15?
Yeah, on your page 15. So if you look at the column headings, page 2023 to stroke 43.
Oh, I did notice that and change it in one of our versions, Ashley, but you must not have noticed that I got it.
What is, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Optimistic to be sure.
It's a long fiscal year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was- Yeah.
That is gonna cover a lot over 10 years.
Oh, that's good, thank you.
And we use so many versions that I think a lot of the time it even reverts some of the issues that we noticed. But
Yeah, exactly. Nope, that's good, thank you. Okay. All right. So other protective services, not much has changed here. We budgeted for a total of 44. Last year, we came in around 41. We're looking at 53, so not a huge jump, but obviously to be expected in the building and in the building inspectors line, that also includes our general and cyber insurance and $3,000 for legal contingency. So that increased slightly just because our insurance increased. But that's any questions on this page?
So the compost station is a reflection that we will eventually get to being able to use it as such.
Yeah,
yeah, so this would be, preparing for putting the protocols in place later this spring. And then finding a volunteer organization that would, presumably need some form of expense coverage or compensation associated with that. But the intention would be to have that all ready before hurricane season.
which apparently I'm going on a cruise during hurricane season, so that should be fun.
You can call us, let us know when they're coming.
Yeah, right?
You're saying comfort station, but is that including the shelter part of it? Because the shelter is when you really need somebody there, and more so than the comfort station.
Yeah, so we was in this discussion with Remo about when the town's costs would be converted over to Red Cross or regional costs. So it would be, this number would be intended to include that shelter cost, but generally it's our understanding we wouldn't end up on the hook for that.
Yeah, no, in a lot of cases, you're not for the shelters,
Yeah,
but that's why I was just wondering, you said about having an organization, but usually it was just opening up for a comfort station, it's just there for the heat and for to plug things in and that type of thing. So basically you need one person there to maybe put some coffee on, that type of thing. You don't need a whole lot of people there to operate the comfort station. It's the shelters where you need.
yeah, it's hard to know right now if there may be some things that we want to purchase in the first year, like you mentioned chargers and stuff, but there may just be some things we want to purchase for comfort for people.
Yeah.
And then there may be something worked out in terms of donating to a volunteer group, in respect of them making themselves available. So we didn't really know what the 5,000 would end up being, but I think in the first year, it's important that there be a budget because, we're talking about.
I'm not arguing with the budget part, I was just wondering whether it was the comfort station or whether it was the shelter part.
But we do have a report coming on the next council meeting this month.
It is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an external one, so I hope it comes as it's supposed to come.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, so now we're getting into some of the meat. Okay, so Public Works, Transportation Services. You'll notice that we've increased everything, again, the salaries we'll discuss in closed session. The telephone line, that will include, as I mentioned before, 2 phones for Public Works, so that's $1,000 each. But everything else in this office supplies has gone up a little bit. But everything is pretty status quo in this section.
So,
Yeah.
just to clarify, transportation services covers
Public Works.
public works.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
I know.
But Public Works also covers recreation, so you actually do see Public Works here and then again.
They pop up in other areas, but this is Public Works.
What people think of generally, yeah.
Yeah, but then they're also in other areas, but
And the reason it's called transportation is because it's about roads.
that's what the government
This is a kind of category.
Well, and
I'm
the
only
department is
asking-
public works and transportation, that's what we call it.
But I'm asking because it's a difficult concept to grasp.
Yeah, no, under the wastewater one, I did put in brackets wastewater, because that one's like health and.
But we can, I mean, we can change these headings, like, these are the headings that the province uses when Ashley has to report the stuff into their system every year.
Yeah.
But we could easily just put public works and transportation services.
Yeah, or I could just put it
And
underneath.
put
public
wastewater and put environmental health in brackets, like we could, we can.
Yeah,
Maybe we should do a little bit of cleanup of the head.
yeah, well, I tried the wastewater one, so let me know if you guys, if that makes more sense, or I can do it the other way, or.
I think it would help the
Okay.
general public, including me.
Some of the categories are really.
Not intuitive,
public
right?
Health is the worst of all of these headings, but I don't know what else to do about it, because we don't really have a structure to report all those items in one place.
Yeah.
You had an explanatory note just right there, transportation services bracket,
Yeah, okay,
Public
perfect.
houses, health is housing and cemetery.
Yeah, some of them just do not, they don't make sense, but it makes sense for somebody.
You obviously
Oh,
have
what
poor
happened?
health at Bloom Cemetery.
Well, we're not supposed to even be here.
No, I went
6,000.
30? Thank you.
We're just curious about the liability insurance and
Yeah.
the percentage decrease, increase, doesn't seem to make jive with the numbers there. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong.
Oh, yeah, no, 100%. That should be 9.94%. This is why I like Excel much better.
Well, and I mean, the last time around, we'll make sure those percent changes there.
Yeah. Perfect, okay. Okay, so this is a small change, but I just wanted to make note of it. So the first two lines, gas and oil, we're looking to replace the two skid steers, S130, S450, with other equipment this year. But the other equipment is also gonna require gas and oil, so I still wanted to budget for that, just so it's on here. Next year, it'll be a separate title, but just heads up, like, you see it and you see like, well, we're not gonna have this, why do we have a budget for it? It really is the budget for the new equipment. I just wanted to.
Be presumptuous to title it here since we haven't approved.
Exactly, so I just wanted to make sure that the dollars were in there, and it's a small amount, but I just wanted to make that point.
The other thing that we'll talk more about on capital here, but it does come up, is the disposal revenues are not included in the budget. The thing about this, when we get a new piece of equipment and we sell a piece of equipment, that actually goes directly into reserve at that proceed. So it's not reflected in here, but again, like other situations where we're being conservative, there would just be more money in reserve than what we've projected based on, we don't know how much we'll get from selling off.
Yeah.
Old equipment.
Exactly, and then where I have the second point right there, same deal, we're looking at getting a new tractor. Forgive me if I don't have these exactly what they are, but I still wanted to account for that there will be some repairs until we replace this item. If you go down to, or if I go down actually, what is happening? See, this is what happens when I don't have a mouse. Shenanigans.
And if you're going back to that page.
I know, it really, apparently I should have talked about that page more, it's not.
It's the only one that's under budget, it's under last year.
Right?
The computer's trying to tell us something.
Exactly, tree removal and planting, we are keeping that at the 20,000, we carried it forward from prior year, we hadn't used it. Now, Jonathan mentioned that if we get a certain mower that's in our capital budget, then we won't need this, so we may have to hire someone if we don't have a certain mower, but, so I put it in there because if we don't approve that capital budget, we're gonna have the expense of hiring somebody for vegetation stuff. Yes,
So I'm not sure about those notes. I think I think maybe there's a cross wire there, because this item, tree removal and planting, was requested by council in order to have accommodation to talk about and then do tree removal and planting through the year that we always talk about. So I'm not sure.
maybe that's why
And
Francis
same-
was giving me a look.
I'm not sure about that either. I think last year, the part of the tree removal and planting might have been the beginning of the urban forest master plan development that didn't happen. But otherwise, I think there probably is some.
There's a
actual-
$4,000 expense in there.
Okay, yeah, so something just
Narrative
didn't.
formula.
fit there.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway. it's
Okay,
not-
so ignore what I said. I am wrong. My note is incorrect. Nor the crazy lady at the table.
Councillor Campbell will probably add to.
I'm curious about public transit. What is that topic? Just below the tree removal and planting. 1800.
My gosh, I don't have a note there. That's a very good question.
I'm sorry about the storage shed. That's one of those ones where I did change it to not being all caps a couple times, but every time it reverts to being all caps.
I caught a few of them this time. Penny, I'll have to get back to you on that one. That one I'm not, it's not. Let's call it an undertaking. Yeah, I honestly don't remember what that was for. Usually I have a note there and I don't, but I replaced it with that Jonathan note in that line. So I'm thinking I just screwed it up and there should be a note there. So
And I do think we're going to get a proposal about a possible public transit request coming, because we had a precursor from Gary Ramey and his business partner last year, and they've been back to the MODL internal committee. My understanding is they're coming back around to everybody with a concrete budget proposal. So unfortunately, that's not in here. It's going to be something that would end up as an operating reserve cost in the current year if council later approves it. So just when thinking about the operating reserve balance, think there's stuff like that comes up.
Will it be possible to reach out to them, just get an idea what it is, that there's some.
I can actually now, I think, go back to the numbers they gave to MODL. I think I even have access to it, but I didn't necessarily want to presuppose our support of it, since I don't even really know what's being proposed. But I can send that to you guys if,
Yeah, it'd be a good idea.
okay, you'll notice on this page, professional development, physical development, we have annual amounts for staff. So for example, every year for physical development, we have $200 that you could spend for something to keep you active. People buy sneakers, people buy all kinds of good stuff like that. So last year we bumped it down a little bit. So I wanted to reflect exactly how much it would cost us this year. We also have a new member to the team, so it's the increased cost there. But so that is for 4 employees for the 64 and the 8. Everything else has pretty much stayed the same.
like a comment. Oh, sorry.
Who's the new member of the staff that you,
In Public Works, Dwayne,
okay.
yeah.
So that's an increase in numbers.
Yeah, right?
Last year.
Last
It was
year.
it was
Yeah,
last
but what all I mean is that for this budget, it was 4 times whatever, whereas last year we cut it a little bit. So this is representing the cost for all 4 employees should they take it. So
Yeah, I mean, these professional development budgets are not usually expended in, to the maximum amount.
there, yeah,
But we do
exactly.
wanna Encourage staff, especially new
Yeah.
staff who are trying to get qualifications that will
Yeah.
benefit the town.
Yep.
And I just want to mention asset management because it does show some growth over the years there. We talked last year about, we have now switched to a contracted service to support the GIS system. So that's there's about a $3,000
Mhm.
extra cost that is associated with that, included in that line.
How about the traffic authority? We budgeted highly. We didn't spend much last year.
So traffic authorities, just again, kind of like the legal that is under town is when I go to engineers, but only about just an individual question type of thing. So if it's a project, if it turns into capital, then it's not going to be reflected in here. So I think what happened last year was we were thinking about the configuration of Pleasant. And now that that is a project, it's actually, now it's part of the capital cost.
Okay.
So that's, I try to associate engineering with capital wherever possible, because it is favorable to make it part of the project, especially if it makes gas tax eligible, for example.
Okay. So again, salaries we'll go over later. There is a substantial bump in patching streets, sidewalks, materials. You know, I think if you're driving around town and you see the holes, I know I hit one last year and it didn't do well for my car. My husband cried. Well, he didn't really cry, but
There
so
are, you know, the capital side also really reflects that. you know,
Yeah.
We have gone quite a number of years without a lot of investment in. road
Exactly.
quality, and so now there are some things that need to get done.
yeah, so I think I think for the betterment of the town, this is a fair for anyone driving. Are there any oh, and sorry, street lighting. So, anything that involved power, I added the 34.9% onto there. So when you see that jump, that is assuming we receive our rate. Are there any questions on this page?
In street lighting.
Yeah.
There has been some conversation with the chamber about some lighting and electrical work. Is that included in this at all, or is this just the street lights that but I consider what's down in the waterfront street lighting, and they're talking about lighting of poles during the winter.
Yeah, this wouldn't include any of that.
Yeah,
This
this
is
is just-
actually the electrical utility charges the town for the provision of street lighting.
Okay.
So that's what this is for. So all that other stuff is discretionary. And the increase here is just, we increased our electrical rates. We're one of the customers. And actually you see it hits the utilities, the water, wastewater quite hard as well. Just because we're using a lot of electricity. So a 34% increase affects us just like it does anyway.
Okay.
We're all feeling it. Oh my goodness.
Oh,
I'm literally just pressing down. I'm gonna say we're on 35. There we go. Oh, I did.
Yeah, you're right.
Correctly. Yeah, there you go. All right, so, there's not much change in this one. So I think we can probably move on to the next one. You know, we have to paint the lines every year. We have, you know, similar expenses each year.
Yeah, it's worth noting the line painting has come up a lot, and Jonathan does expect it probably won't stay at that level again next year, but we did just discuss adding a number of accessible spaces and some additional curb painting, so, and we have a request for an expensive new crosswalk design, so all those things are in here. Probably they won't all need to be repainted every year, so it will probably come down a little bit next year.
And then, so we're basically showing total operating expense. Yeah, sorry. Oh,
Now that CAO has mentioned the expense associated with crosswalks
So,
and differently designed crosswalks, what, can you give us a quote for?
yeah,
the
we
differences?
don't, so we're just working out the design for the Truth and Reconciliation crosswalk that's been proposed, so I don't have an amount for that, but the Pride crossings are, I think they're about $2,500.
As a standard, two parallel lines would be what, and then the zebra crossing.
It doesn't break out that way, they
No.
just quote on everything except this non-standard paint colors and stuff that's required. So basically and this is good because people always ask this question, they have to mix those paints to get the required traction level. So like they buy the paint, they mix it with, I think it's a glass fragments and other, so that process, custom doing that, and then for such small amounts, they're resetting every time, so they do kind of charge us a premium to do that. Now, if we had, you know, 20 Pride crossings, that would actually bring the cost per unit down very substantially. So I guess, you know, that's something that, but yeah, so right now the Truth and Reconciliation, I mean, it's only two color. So I don't know, it may not be as much. If the volume of paint is more because it's the whole thing is painted. But so that's to be determined. But the important thing is that the paint, you know, that is used, and especially if it's the whole crossing is painted, is appropriate for that usage, and that does cost more. And you know, you kind of get what you pay for.
So I just haven't thought of this before, that when a community group asks to have a particular crosswalk design, then the town assumes the additional cost for that. Okay, thank you.
okay. So, total operating expenses around 562 for this budgeted year. Last year we budgeted 504. We came in under at 407, again unaudited. Yeah, so are there any questions?
And we'll see what all that $1 million of capital is.
Yeah, exactly, that'll all come. Dylan does his thing. Sounds so good? Okay. All right, public health and welfare, cemetery. Yeah, exactly. No, I get, listen, I get it. It doesn't,
Can we talk about it today and find something to change that, because it doesn't reflect.
like, do you want me to just put cemetery underneath, just so you can see that that's what it is? We could do the official titles.
Housing and cemeteries is what's actually.
Yeah, housing and cemetery, sorry. We could do
So why
something
don't
like
we
that.
just call it that?
Yeah.
But it's not public health.
You know, you-
Some people is crying, they don't like their title.
Job description.
Lack of public health.
So nicely, at least this time around, there's a substantial part of this that really is public health and welfare, I think, which is the housing initiative. So just that is for the housing strategy that we expect the province any week now will be releasing the needs assessment. It seems like it's getting close. So then we can get off to the races.
Okay, so is there any specific questions on this page? It's pretty,
So we're gonna change the title of that.
I will change the title.
Excuse me, the 30,000 is what you referred to, Dylan?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an estimate right now, because we haven't received.
And the cemeteries operating grant unaudited there, that was for, it will, I think, still come up a bit in the final version, but that was for the tree work that took place. So it was a huge spike, where we're back down to more normal cemetery levels here. That big spike was $20,000 of tree work at the Bayview Cemetery.
Could you go back to that $30,000? Isn't that the money that we had already put aside last year?
Yeah.
What?
So the 30,000 is an operating initiative. So there's a corresponding transfer from operating reserve for it. Last year, we projected we'd use 5,000 of that, but we didn't, because the province didn't get anything out in time. So now we're saying the full 30,000 that we've said for several years was the cost of the housing strategy would be incurred this year. So that's why it's all in here.
Oh,
But it's still coming from the operating reserve. So to your point, like, we put it aside, we did put it aside, yeah.
Good.
Okay, environmental development.
And then right off the top here, we get another one, accessibility initiatives. That's a similar thing. We had planned it, we didn't do it for reasons.
Yeah.
Now we're planning it again. That's coming from the reserve, so that was something that we put aside. And it's come down because we've applied for some provincial funding to supplement. Actually, the total cost has gone up, but our projected shares, it's about 45,000 now. Our projected share is less than what we thought we'd be spending last year.
Yeah, and I think it's the same thing for anti-racism. We didn't spend what we projected last year, and now we have less.
Well, yeah, last year we just mirrored the amount that the accessibility coordinator cost.
Yeah,
And this year, this has been specifically worked out as the
this was
town of Home
provided.
Bay budget. This is
Yeah,
a percentage.
exactly,
So
it's a solid number.
I think it may end up being a bit more than that, all things considered. I don't know if Chester will absorb the position to be resident of Chester.
Can I just back up to the top one, the regional planning and legal services? Is that to do with Plan Home Bay?
So Plan Home Bay should be in there.
Mhm.
It was 80, I think there's only 31,000 of it left in the current year, so. But that Plan Home Bay part is another operating reserve initiative, so even though it's in here, it's actually drawing from the operating reserve. And the last page is the breakdown shows those transfers, so actually we'll point that out.
On that same line, I was wondering why we're combining legal services and advertising on one expense line.
Oh, sorry, yeah, maybe that's where the 31.
That's where the 31 is, yeah.
That's where-
Yeah,
The regional planning is just the actual day-to-day contracted planning and development services.
Oh,
That's all we claimed, but that's all. I would have thought it would be.
There's
more.
building inspection separately, that was on 2 tabs ago for 19,000, but yeah, this is like Heather and Emily. and Jonathan,
yeah. And then Plan Home Bay's on the line below.
now we know it takes 6 weeks to get it one. Pay more.
On the
Sorry.
Anti-Racism and Discrimination Initiative, to say this is for the salary projected for the regional coordinator.
Yeah.
My assumption is they do a good job and they actually engage council, there should be expenses tied to that. So I would say that this would be a low.
Yeah, this probably is a low bar, but it also isn't hired yet, and so the offset of when that position is hired will probably work out about the same.
I think the document showed room for changes can be made once the board is set up. Wasn't that part of the understanding? That-
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly right now, like, this is just a staff projection.
Yeah.
Like, we don't even have the members of a committee or anything, so who knows what expenses may be determined, but it'll take longer into the year, so I think that phase in and the fact that this is for a full year's cost will actually work out equivalent, roughly equivalent.
Okay,
And then the urban forest master plan has been sort of, again, fully in 1 year.
oh,
Now,
yes,
our expectation is that will take place entirely within this year. I just wanted to point it out there. It was previously partially in another stretched over 2 years. Now it's in one place, but it's operating reserve funded. So again, we put the money aside previously. It's not in this. And the car share program design is actually in capital. You'll see it there. It may not become capital. This is one of those things where does it actually result in a capital expenditure and then becomes considered to have been an eligible capital expense? So wherever it is, it would have been a reserve transfer. It's just a question of which reserve.
Are we looking into some kind of grants from government departments to work, like something from the Department of Environment or?
The urban forest fund?
Yes, and or student, hiring the interns, are they students?
So the urban forest one, part of the cost will be an intern this summer, and that is a subsidized position. So we got some external funding there, but the rest of the cost will be hiring an arborist to complete the work on the plan in the fall. And I've not seen funding. Lauren will keep looking, but as far as at this point, we haven't identified funding for that. Right? But she is always looking for funding.
I think it might be helpful to put a note on the CASHA program design that talks about what.
Yeah.
But because the way it looks now is,
It's not.
yeah, we're just not doing it, right?
Yeah, that's probably the best thing to do. And I think also, all of the operating reserve initiatives are normally do get notation to indicate, see them on the operating reserve sheet. So we'll make sure that we pick those up. I know they're all in here. My biggest concern was that we accidentally left any of them out.
Yeah.
So they're all in here, but they're not all notated.
Well, the title, again, environmental development services. Including, excuse me, it's the allergies. Community development as an environmental development service. It's just, I'm raising the question about altering the title somehow of that category. It just seems odd to have community development in environmental development services.
I mean, maybe the other way around, just calling it community development is better. I don't know.
My instinct would be to somehow group it with housing. That's my thinking, it would fit better with that, but
We might have to wait until next year for that, because I know what Ashley aspires to do is to almost have two versions of this, and they'll automatically inform each other. But if we start moving things from one heading to another, what actually happens is she has to put them all back manually when doing the reporting, so it does start to become. But just a little more time for her now with the town, and we'll get to a point where we can move it all around in the best way for the public, which would be ideal, rather than doing this on the basis of provincial reporting.
yeah, I think this is an ongoing evolution and where we want to see it, and I suspect every year we'll probably have changes, and that's normal, so.
So you're saying next year we should take you to task about the headings and what.
but in the meantime, could we call it environmental and community services?
I mean, I think that's a simple enough change
Yeah.
without moving the housing.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, it would be good to consolidate, really, the public health would just go right in here, if that was, if it all was mapped to the right places for reporting.
Okay. So we are looking at operating expenses for environmental and community services. Total of 261, 448. Last year we budgeted for 221, came in around 179.
And there's a variety of capital here, but this is mostly going to Edgewater Street.
Yeah.
Line stuff when we get down there.
Yeah, and you'll see that a little later on. All right.
Right, we'll see where we get down there. There's a lot of capital under.
There's a lot. So, environmental health services or wastewater. That's one I did kind of change because I was like, that doesn't make sense. But, okay, so let's look at. We have $16,000 in engineering and consultants. So I'm gonna refer to my notes on this one because I said earlier I'm not super in tune with exactly what these projects are, but this is basically contract services for stormwater infiltration project, which is an operating initiative.
So when we get to the operating initiatives tab, they're all linked to the council strategic plan. And one of the items in the strategic plan was diagnostics on the water wastewater systems to better understand where we're either in the case of water losing it or in the case of wastewater gaining it, because infiltration requires then the pumping and treatment of stormwater, similar waste of money for the utility. So our new operator, now that we've got new staff and they've had time to get their feet under them, has a plan there, which would involve some contracted services and installation of some equipment in the field, and essentially being able to better target any efforts to remove stormwater from our wastewater treatment system. So that's what's included under there. And as I actually said, it is more detailed under operating initiatives.
And then if you look under the sewer cleaning fees on the last line, we have 18,000. So we've added $15,000 to cover a sewer main cleaning inspection and assessment due to the age. We're gonna do this prior to the paving on Fairmont, Orchard, and Parish.
So that also kind of counts in the diagnostics category. This is wastewater system needs some better attention to better understand where to target our capital on.
Exactly. And then you will see over here, the electricity, I've accounted for that 34.9%. So you can see the substantial increase right there. Salaries and benefits, we won't go into right now. Repair, here we go. Yeah, so we have 18,000 for repairs. And this is, bear with me, this has to do with sludge. So it's a cell-free draining sludge removal. So you might be able to explain a little more, but apparently we have high sludge and we need to reduce it from working.
It is, we have a lagoon-based treatment system, so over time, material accumulates in the lagoons and does have to be cleaned out, and that's what that cost is.
Yeah, so I just care about what the number is. So.
I should ask you to explain what does a clean out involve?
Usually sometimes it's talking about electrical stuff. I'm just like, everything's a pole. That's the only example I have.
I'd like to know more about the microbiology.
Yeah.
So how often does that happen, roughly?
It's certainly been longer than it was projected to be. I would have to ask Scott how long it's supposed to be, but we've definitely gotten a lot longer than, I think this might be the first time that lagoon is having sludge removed.
Wow.
But yeah, it's something that's supposed to, like, the projection is it's supposed to happen, and then you monitor it and, you know, do it until it gets to that level, so.
And what's the effect if you don't? I mean,
Oh, geez, I'm getting out of my depth. Kelly's gonna help me.
That we explain, yes, because when you're aerating those things and your microbes in there that chew up all the gunk that comes from the town. And eventually that stuff settles out and becomes like a layer of stuff. The problem is as the layer grows, the capacity to treat reduces. So at some point you have to clean it out to get back to your full capacity, which is why they have, I think, 4 cells, so they'll do.
I see.
Oh,
We used to swim in it. Did you really? Down at the town beach.
yeah.
We had swimming lessons down there.
I don't think you'd want to swim in the lagoons.
No, but I'll tell
The
you.
ducks do it, but
It wasn't
The
fun.
heart was certainly a lot.
yeah.
I think I need another tour.
And then below that, you'll see, electricity, and that's with the rate increase as well.
So when we talk about the value of removing stormwater from the system, you know, much like we talked about with the water system and losses, basically this electricity is, a lot of it is pumping stormwater and treating stormwater. And we could really cut those costs if we could get some of the stormwater out of the system. And that means redirecting it into natural absorptive and holding drainage systems like swamps and the harbor.
Would it be possible someday to actually cost that out for the entire town, what that would entail?
I think the work that Scott is planning this year will give us enough information to like basically what we said with the water was we have about $30,000 of losses, the cost of treating and pumping those the lost water. And so I think we'll have a similar conclusion on that number. But most significantly also where it is coming from, because what I want is a map of the system showing where most of the stormwater is coming in,
Yeah.
and we can figure that out.
And then MJSB, they sent us a quote for the garbage removal, 91,000. So last year we were at 83, came in around 72. So that's the cost. Yeah, exactly. So total operating expenses, 494, above prior year's budget at 397. But I think with the projects that we're doing, it's understandable that we would expect the expenses to go up. Any other questions on wastewater, also known as environmental health? Oh my gosh.
There we go.
You're in 44?
It's because when I do the down arrow, if I need to manually do this, I like the shortcuts. Okay. Rec and culture. So
I
sorry.
think your solution is the CASA is not in the current sheet that we have, still back in the 15 sheet.
Oh, maybe.
So-
Oh, yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying. So it's reverting back to there.
Yes, if you change your cursor to the
So the
hand,
current one, yeah.
if you, instead of
This right
selecting,
here.
yeah, and then click
Yeah.
on the page, and then now
Page,
that
yeah.
probably will change that,
Exactly.
yeah.
Nice.
Hopefully that's a good theory. Yeah.
Well, it's better than how I was doing. So thank you.
So I'll just quickly point out that the line here for salaries, we talked about public works, that some of it is in rec, so this is just a public works time allocation to rec facility maintenance, that's the thing.
Yeah, we have a monstrous spreadsheet that basically breaks out every possible percentage of people's time for all the different departments when they're crossing over to different areas. And you're welcome to see it if you want to see it sometime in closed session, but it's huge. So, but this is how we break it out, and this is where it comes from. The only really thing I wanted to show you guys here, and this is kind of the opposite of what normally happens under park, fields, playgrounds, we have a reduction in expenses. We did a lot of maintenance last year, a lot of work, and we don't expect to have to do that this year. So I just thought it was kind of cool that we have a
Well,
substantial.
I wish it was as good as it sounds, but really there's a bunch of work under capital that we debated over whether it should be capital or operating, which represents the terrible destruction of a lot of our green spaces by grubs over the past year. So
Yeah.
this number looks low. It's actually higher than it was last year.
All
But
bugged and horrible.
we decided to capitalize those costs after.
Yeah,
some
it's a big
debate,
enough
so-
project, I think,
Yeah.
that they deserve, but I still like my story.
I was in shock when you say that, but.
Does any of that reduction reflect the planned agreement with Mahone Bay United and the Mahone Bay Center for the field?
I don't think it's, I mean, we did have a kind of a understanding of how much of the 24,000 at the top was time spent mowing that field. We didn't change the formula that Ashley was talking about that allocates those costs, so we'll see. It could very slightly reduce it, but honestly, I'm sure we'll be doing that work on other recreational properties in the coming years, so. Yeah, no, it doesn't. But what does reflect the agreement with the proposed agreement with the Mahone Bay United and the Mahone Bay Center is the last line here,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
So
This
18,000.
18,000 is
Okay. So-
essentially the year-over-year anticipated subsidy that would be needed for that agreement, and council knows the background to that, and you'll also see when we get the grants that there's a grant for the purchase of an auto mower. That's a separate piece of the grant, and there's another grant, the biggest grant, which is a request from the center, and so we'll talk about that as well.
And how much of the cost of doing that sports field operation is going to be provided by the MBU group?
We've asked that, we don't have that answer, so this was just their request that the council did turn around and said, could you give us a budget that contextualizes this? But we don't have that yet.
Okay, so this could be reduced then, is that what we're saying?
No, I think what we're saying is they're gonna come back and say their total budget is more than this, and this is their request from us for part of it.
Okay,
Yeah, I just want to say that I appreciate the narrative about reduction in costs here, but I think in truth, it's not. The reality is that costs are not reducing in this area. It's just that we've allocated them.
To be capitalized. Yeah, I guess in my mind, I have operating and I have capital. So on the operating side, they're being reduced on the capital. Yeah, so I probably was politicianing it a little bit too much, so I apologize for that.
There's a lot of, I mean, some of it's discretionary, some of it's not. There's a lot of capital that the town has discussed around recreation. Obviously, the pool is a very large one, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so we're still seeing fairly similar costs on everything else. We're looking, if you look down below, we have capital projects, which we kind of were just discussing at 379, which is way more than what we had in the prior year of 90, of which 38 we completed.
The reduced taxes items, council had talked about wanting to
Yes.
see more context of recreation and culture, so those previously appeared under fiscal services, but we just brought them in here because
They
when we're
more
talking
applicable.
about the costs for the museum and the
Yeah.
library and the pool and the new sports, feed them all in one place.
Okay. So total operating expenses, 152. And then we kind of just went over the capital. So any more questions on this? All right. Education, so we don't actually have, last year we had the actual number from the board, but we don't have that yet. I did speak to my contact there and had a general idea of what they were going to do. So the 470, I think, is a good number. It's just not, has been provided to us yet.
Oh, that last one's also where the low income rebate is. So I just wanted to briefly comment on, we substantially increased the low income rebate amounts last year and the budget for them, and it looks like we're a bit undersubscribed. We definitely had an increase in the cost there. We said we'd budget 30, we'd see what that resulted in. So there were not, I don't know if you have the numbers, but there were not a lot more applicants, but the amount per applicant was increased.
Exactly.
And so that it really didn't result in the projected number of additional
Update.
applicants.
Yeah.
And so we haven't recommended any change this year. I guess presumably people will become more aware. So we'll leave it at 30. But obviously, one of the final things in any budget would be council can discuss changing our low income thresholds or the amount given. So that's baked in here that it's staying the same, but obviously council's discretion is always in part of the budget process to change those amounts.
Now my computer just died.
Oh.
Can you guys, I'm worried about people online if they can,
Well,
I guess they can still pick me up on the speaker and they're.
David can still see
What do you
you.
mean?
My computer just died, so this is where I was, but as long as everyone can still see this and hear me, then we're fine. Okay, perfect.
And actually, your picture's still there, just frozen.
Oh.
Is it a good picture?
Yeah.
Not as close, but do you need a charge of cord?
I do, but I'm okay. I can
I need that other computer.
The previous page, the debt charges, can you speak to that a little bit? I can't remember.
YouTube's good.
Okay. Well, what is that, principal installments or sinking fund?
So those are just the debt that we've had for a while. To be honest, I don't have my notes anymore, so
Well, it is just the same, that's our existing debt, like we didn't change, we only changed fire last year, so fire changed.
Yeah.
But the town general didn't borrow anything new.
So a lot of these, yeah, so if you see it's consistent over the years. So it's a debt that we've had for many years and we're just,
What I'm asking, it's a debt for what?
Oh, well, that's a whole nother sheet, but you can send that one around.
Yeah.
with Salaries detail.
yeah,
We
exactly.
don't normally map out all the old debts in here.
But it has nothing necessarily to do with education.
No, definitely not, no.
Yeah.
Fiscal service is just where things that don't fit other places
Go,
end up, basically.
yeah. Yeah, I
And
can
she did
send-
retitle it to education fiscal services because the fiscal services doesn't really capture the gigantic amount that we give to education.
But yeah, I can, I'll provide a debt schedule the next time we meet as well as, and then you can have a detailed list of exactly where we're at, because there's.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then for the, I guess, the folks like me who understand these words differently. So what's the difference between fiscal services and financial finance costs? So you have a finance department.
Yeah.
costs, And this is fiscal services.
I
So what's
think-
the difference?
I think really the fiscal service is just the ad hoc that doesn't, like Dylan said.
Yeah, like the
they don't
financial
fit.
is the finance department, all our costs.
Yeah.
All the fiscal services here is just things that didn't fit somewhere else. It has nothing to do with the town's own financial services department.
Yeah, so if, it doesn't fit under health and whatever, it doesn't fit here, so it's kind of just like a dump area for that.
Could we call it miscellaneous fiscal services? Is that too?
The unloved,
It basically is the miscellaneous sheet. I
Yeah.
guess, that is-
yeah, it's kind of all the things that we're just trying to put somewhere that don't belong anywhere else.
And then it's also, we didn't choose to put them here. This is what the problem is. So
Right.
let's put this in here, yeah.
Yeah,
Just leave it here.
but yeah, I think a debt schedule would be actually a great idea, yeah, so you can see exactly where we're at and where we're at with all the debt from historic and, yeah. Sounds good to me.
So what's taxation and other general administrative services?
So that is the rebate, the 30,000. Let me just go down to my notes here.
So
We
the
just
30 is the low income.
The low
so
income, yeah.
That's when we reduce
Okay,
taxes based on those
okay,
applications.
Yeah,
Okay,
And then the other.
that's property tax.
And then the other one is, it's just a reduction in, the taxes the water utility would pay to the town, so the town by bylaw has exempted the utility from
yeah,
paying taxes, so. We could tax our own utility, but we don't, so that's what we give up in terms of taxation.
so there's three,
Oh,
there's three items that we don't, that we give up in taxation, and it's the water, the center, and what was the third one again that we had shown?
The center and the museum are the ones that moved over to the other.
That's what I'm saying, yeah, like there's three overall.
Here's water.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we moved the other two over last year, all three were right here, we moved the other two over, but there's three in total that we, yeah. And that's further along in this too, it'll show you the full breakdown of exactly what we're,
That was a question.
So why is it called tax rebated on cancellations? What does the word cancellation?
I think that's just what the section calls it, I think that's just, the section's referred there, and I'm, this is before my time, but I do think that that's just,
I mean, the good thing is those ones can be.
yeah, we
changed.
could change, I could change that if,
You could change that to
To
low income.
low
rebates.
income,
I don't
yeah.
think I heard that.
Thank you.
yeah.
We inherited these have been the headings for a long time.
Yeah, I get to know them pretty well, but
I know
this
what-
is where.
what
it's
Luke
important
always
you guys
talked about
have
is
input.
changing them here isn't what he really needs to do, is changing them in the actual financial system, so. When we change it here, if it doesn't match, then that creates a kind of annoyance strategy, so she's gotta go and actually change some of the system too.
And so the province of Colorado can put it.
We're good friends. The problem.
Yeah, sitting on a first name basis out there.
They know me well. whether they want to or not. Okay, and then obviously the transfers are just the transfers between the different reserve funds.
So this is where money that was earmarked, and there's a further
Yeah.
breakdown at the beginning of the capital section.
Yeah.
Goes to those reserves that it was earmarked to go to.
Yeah, so you'll see that further along. Okay, was there any other questions before we get into fire?
Oh, well, that last explanation sheet is significant.
Oh, sorry,
So
yeah,
this is where.
The
it
operating
details-
reserve.
so these are further detailed in the operating initiative sheet.
Yeah.
But the transfer from operating reserve, these should be the same things that you then see on the operating.
Yes.
And you see each of them, as we noted, reflected in the relevant department. But essentially what happens is they show up as an expense in the department in which they belong. They show up as an expense here, as a transfer here, so we're getting the money to cover that expense.
Yeah.
And then the operating initiative sheet is just more for reporting so that everyone can see what's happening.
yeah.
So will you be able to speak to why we don't have any transfers in the two special reserve funding operation and general capital fund?
Oh, and is it on the previous sheet?
Yes.
Special.
So the one
Yeah,
fifty.
so operating, we had a 150,000, we debated it every year. We felt that the operating reserve levels were somewhat better. And the capital reserve levels are under pressure because of the amount of capital work that we're looking at. So every year we debated this and every year we proposed it. Many years council, felt that it wouldn't be necessary if we had a surplus, and so we didn't actually do it. But this year we're saying, no, let's not do it. And it was always a bit of a discussion because ultimately it's dipping into monies that were allocated for capital and saying, we have a lot of these projects, we just went over the list of these projects that are capital-like projects, and we need to be able to ensure that those also can be paid for without impacting the general tax rate. But we've done that now to the point where the operating reserve balance is a little better. And the capital reserve, as I say, is certainly needs all the money coming in we can if we're gonna do all the projects that we're.
So instead of taking it from here, instead of putting it here, we're gonna put it here instead.
And then the other one, did you ask the general
Yeah,
capital
yeah,
from
general
revenue?
capital.
So that's just when it happens, like we never budget. If we decide at the end of the year to leave capital here that doesn't get paid for from a reserve or doesn't get paid for by borrowing, then it would end up here. And you'd have, I don't have a breakdown of the 56,000 in front of me.
Okay. And then what you're projecting is that there won't be any this year.
Yeah, we don't, I mean, the budget never anticipates it, but
Yeah.
discretionarily at the end of the year, sometimes items that would have been projected as being paid for somewhere else end up here.
Okay, so like Dylan said, no one right here, you'll be able to get much more detail on the special initiatives tab, so. And as he mentioned, these are projects that are of a capital nature, but they're not capital, so they're in the operating. But it's important to know exactly what they are, and there's a lot more detail in the special initiatives. Or operating, I was called special initiatives, I have no idea why, but I'm pretty sure it's titled operating.
Special
initiatives.
operating initiative.
There we go. Okay, fire. So this is with the 25% rate increase. So if you see, we're looking at a total revenue of 672. Last year, we budgeted for 466. We came in around 426. So the 25% does impact this. You can see the increase. There's not too much, you can see the MJSB IT services, we budgeted 2,100 last year, it's 10,000 this year. To Councilor Ngata's point, it is quite a large jump in all aspects, in all departments, and.
So the biggest thing on this page that's new is the From Fire Society. So essentially, you'll see on the following.
Yeah.
There's expense associated with the borrowing on the hall. And not the station, but the hall.
Yeah.
And there's an agreement that the town and the fire society, which basically is the folks who do fundraising for the department, incorporated to be able to have an agreement with the town. And that this is the amount that corresponds to principal and interest on the hall portion. And then also an additional estimated 25,000 in fundraising contribution to the equipment reserve. So that would be locked in for the next truck purchase. That agreement said 25,000 is what we would aim for. But obviously the department at the time was struggling with, we didn't have bingo, even like COVID was shut everything down. So things have come back, there's 50-50, there's some more revenue coming in. And I did meet recently and was informed that it probably would be within the revenue for the year to make enough money to do this, but we'll have to wait and see at the end of the year. if that-
So not to, up to pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple more years. Everything's so expensive, right? People don't have as much disposable income,
That's
unfortunately,
right.
right? Okay, and then, training has gone up substantially. I guess there's 2 big training sessions prepared for this year, and this is the cost of them.
There
So,
will be some revenue. My understanding is outside departments are participating.
yeah, so a couple of our public works, I believe, are participating, so there will be some revenue on that side.
We'll get that too, yeah. and the
Yeah.
Outside fire departments.
Yeah, and on the other,
We haven't
Yep.
projected any revenues. We've just shown the expense. and
yeah, I don't know.
Revenue will probably go in as a reserve donation.
I would assume that would be the appropriate measure, yeah.
On the operating.
Insurance has gone up a little, oh, sorry, Ben.
Why has the honorarium for the chief?
And it says divide by 0. So essentially, we've promoted it for a number of years, and it's been our understanding that the current chief didn't feel that was something that he
Yeah.
needed to do the job. I still feel that the workload is substantial. But we'll have to look at it again down
Yeah.
the road.
Keep
I
offering it. but
yeah,
he's-
I generally, I feel like this is a budget, and the budget's supposed to reflect what we think we're gonna spend, and we don't think we're going to spend it because that's what he said. But, ultimately, I do still feel that it would be appropriate.
Yeah, it's still there if he wants it,
But
but
it's a lot of work. I mean. it really is.
absolutely, he's busy, yeah.
So the general membership does get a honorarium when they do something. But the chief doesn't want the honorarium.
So he gets just like everybody else.
He gets-
He doesn't want.
doesn't want the
he doesn't want
extra-
Additional,
Yeah.
Yeah,
So when Ashley says it's still there, where is it?
sorry, I don't mean it's still there as in we budgeted. If he ever changes his mind, like next year, we can put it back, cause it's for him. He's just
Right.
choosing not to take it. So we're not gonna say like, oh, next year we're canceling it. It's not. I'm just saying it's available every year if this is something.
We have the
he
same
changes his mind.
conversation around council honorarium is, if there isn't at least some compensation, people who might otherwise be willing to do this on a volunteer basis may not be able to. And, I'm concerned that impacts people's willingness to do the job.
Yeah.
And certainly our chief gives up income earning opportunities in his
Absolutely.
private life to do the job.
So my proposal will probably be to actually budget for it, give it to him, and he can donate it back.
Okay, well,
Rather than
we can
take
talk
take-
about
take
that
it
next
out
week.
this way, because- Yeah, because this doesn't actually reflect
Yeah.
what we as a town want or has committed to. If it's his choice to donate it back, he can do that. And maybe this is a case of where he's too not modest, but
No, I think it is.
yeah, so, and in many ways.
And maybe, you can just say, instead of 7,500, maybe go to 5,000 or something, that's more reasonable as far as he's concerned.
Yeah,
I know
And then
I know he's something with budgeting too, so, as we all are.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think he was
Give it to him and
looking
can
at the
make it
fact that there's a lot of other things like training in here that would be more deserving of the
Mhm.
budget, but
So we are-
when we talk about it next week, and we're into the making changes to numbers part, we can talk about that.
I support that suggestion.
Okay, so insurance has gone up, slightly. Repairs, I guess there's some more racking and there's a few things that need to be done at the town hall or at the town hall, the fire station.
Selling into the new building, so.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's to be expected when you're in somewhere.
Some changes and few things that need to be done.
Yeah, until you get in and start living there, you're not gonna know
Yeah.
exactly what you need. And so I think that's fair.
While we're on fire hall, there's an ED there.
AED.
Okay, and where else in town do we have them? Do we have one here in the town?
We don't, but we have one next door, so.
Yeah, there's one.
Next door, but are there any other in town?
Mount Vicent, AED.
The Mohammed?
I think there's a map of.
The Legion has.
The Legion
The Legion has one, okay.
We asked for it
there's
in the
a-
exercise class.
Oh,
I
okay.
think the churches have them.
think there's a provincial map of AED.
There is,
locations.
you could be able to go online.
Sure,
I don't think we do.
I don't think we do.
No,
but we should have.
okay, I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, we don't have to
No,
here,
I
but
think if you Google map of AED locations, there is one. It's gonna-
yeah, you can definitely go on. They told us
Okay.
that in our first aid training. You can go on.
You have to register.
Exactly where everything is, yeah. Electricity, I increased that by the 34.9. Equipment maintenance, I mean, obviously now I suspect there will be some equipment maintenance. The equipment's new, but it's, being used and
Yeah, I'm not sure last year if some of it was misallocated. You'll pull it back to this line.
yeah,
There should be nothing last year, but I imagine it was billed and was paid and is just somewhere else in here. And
Yeah.
doesn't represent an actual miss expense.
Yeah.
So this is equipment in the hall,
In the hall.
but not the vehicles, no.
Yes,
Yeah.
This just, and it really should be stationed because it's not the hall, it's the station.
sorry, I'm just putting some notes in here so I don't forget. Okay, so we're gonna add, so if you look at radio repairs and licenses, we need a couple more radios. I believe it's 2. Computer's dead now, so the actual number is, but I think it's 2. It's 2, right? Yeah, I think so. Again, insurance has gone up, uniforms. We're looking at getting some more uniforms. I don't think, yeah, so it's for the firefighting equipment, we've gone from 54 to 75.
Fire wells, dry hydrants,
Yeah,
that's been in there for the last umpteen number of years, since I've been involved. We don't have any fire wells in town anymore. We used to have one, but that's been filled in and no longer serviceable. So unless we're doing some work to the dry hydrants, then
Well, we are this year,
we are.
possibly at Oakland Lake.
Yes.
So, yeah, but yeah, we just left it. I know we talk about it every year.
But I'm just saying the fire wells part of it.
we could probably
drop
remove
it there.
those fire levels.
Yeah, the heading, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think we should probably keep it in there because you never know, some of the pipes might break into the dry hydrant, need to be replaced or
Yeah.
whatever.
But just get rid of the firewalls, 'cause it's kind of misleading. a
Well,
little
it's
bit,
that's
right?
obsolete, so.
Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore. So you'll notice down on the interest line, it says 0 this year. The reason for it is because the interest has been brought down to the debt charges. So,
It's not actually 0.
no, it's not 0. It's just been
Yeah.
reallocated down to the other lines down here. So, within the 58,054, that's interest and principal. The 293 is interest and principal for the new, debenture that we
And the 42,000 is what was brought down from above.
Yeah, so interest is still there. I've just put it now in with the, I lined it up specifically with each.
So why not bring it down and get rid of that?
Well, we always report it, well, it still has last year's actuals, but we will get rid of it.
Yeah, I will, just because I'm showing prior years. I don't wanna mix up the lines.
These just for the fire station, I see the one that says fire hall.
Yeah, so the first one, the 58,000 is the fire hall, and that's
Yeah.
where you have the corresponding transfer from the society that would cover the
Okay,
hall.
so that's on here, under income, I'm assuming then, yeah.
It's on both, the
Yeah.
fire
Okay.
society
Just
provides the
wondering,
revenue,
yes.
and then that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But then the 293 is for the station,
Mhm.
and that's what's causing a deficit
what's
with the
driving.
fire service, which we'll see on the next.
Yeah.
year.
Which again, you're building a brand new building. That's quite expensive. I mean,
Well, it's just a matter of rates and deciding.
Yep.
When assessment is growing, do we cover it all this year, or we're proposing phasing it in over a couple of years, so that's what's happening here.
So you're saying it's gonna go up again next year?
No, this won't go up, but the rate,
possibly may.
I would expect that based on growth and assessment, which we'll see how much it grows on its own.
Yeah.
There'll have to be another adjustment, and the outside area rate, like we talked about, will probably come up a little bit next month.
So hopefully I'm not opening up a can of worms, but the principal and installments for the fire hall
Mhm.
is 58. The principal and installment short-term financing, is that for the fire hall? or
That has
for the
nothing to
fire
do with
station?
it.
Has nothing to do with that.
Nothing to do with either.
So for principal and interest, we're paying 58. But the fire the society is giving us 85. So
They're giving us the 58 plus a
The
$25,000 contribution to the equipment reserve, which is mapped through to the equipment reserve.
okay,
And this is the agreement.
And that's
that
only
go
if
on.
they raise
so
the
if they raise
50
enough, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
So, the 42,000 for short-term financing, is that for things like bridging the financing on a solar garden and stuff like that?
Yeah, that was something that was before I came here and we're looking at refinancing it.
It wasn't, it's not, no, I mean, those are in the cost of those capital projects,
Okay.
or they're supposed to be. I know Joe was talking about this last time. This is an actual loan. It was taken out previously. I'm assuming it's a previous truck purchase or something, but it was an actual loan.
It's through BMO, it's not through,
The reason it's considered short-term financing is because it wasn't through MFC.
yeah,
Yeah. And,
so that's what I
And
estimate
that's
the
on what part of
refinancing.
the hall?
It's not any of these. It was a previous debt. It's been years now.
Yeah, but
I just don't know what it was for. The
So
42,000.
the fire protection then, because it's in under fire protection, right?
It's got to have been with the fire service, yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know, maybe you remember, and she doesn't have her computer that could explain it, so.
And that's what your debt schedule.
It will be on there, it will be
Yeah,
on
will
there.
help with, right?
Yep, you'll see that on there. Yep,
So then I'll get all the breakdown.
I got all the juicy details.
I don't know why we borrowed from BMO for what is effectively a long-term loan.
Yeah, and I've spoke,
Way back when we bought them fire trucks.
I think.
that's what we're thinking, yeah.
That's been paid off. I thought we had paid that.
No, it came due this February and
It was over a longer period, so it came due, but there was still an amount
That
left.
must have been on the latest one, because
Yeah.
when we bought the old number 3. That the fire department itself somehow or other had borrowed the money.
Okay.
You know, they aren't supposed to, so that they borrowed for that and for another truck, and we paid that off way before it was due.
Okay.
But
Well, we'll get
this
the
was before
details on
this was
this
the
one.
number 1.
Yeah.
yeah, we'll have clarity the next time we meet. But yeah, that's just an estimate of what I think the refinancing will be on that, so. And then water supply and hydrants, 180, with a total, so
Transfer the reserve there maps to the 25,000 from the department, from the society, a matching 25,000 from the town.
Yeah.
Which would come off the fire rates, so that's a portion of fire rates people pay goes to the equipment reserve for trucks.
and then the 15 for the
is projected
donations.
donations where people actually come to the office.
We won't see that this year.
Yeah, we're hopeful, we're hopeful.
I know.
Maybe we get like a lottery winner
The
here.
15 was when we used to go door to door. We don't do that.
Oh, really? You guys, I didn't know that.
We used to go door to door canvassing,
Yeah, and that was a good.
but we haven't done that in the last number of years. Mind you, the year before last. I think we sent out a letter, and I think we got around 7.
That's pretty good.
So that'll happen this year, and I don't.
Actually, could you remind me what the increase in revenue was because of the increased fire rates? Or the combination of that and assessment?
So,
So like from 215 to 336, so 120,000
Yeah.
bucks. And we still have a deficit of 220.
Yeah. yeah, and it's driven by the.
Yep.
the-
But that's kind of the hydrant metals, right?
Yeah, they're all in there.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll double check those numbers, because I know when we looked at it as recently as yesterday, the deficit was definitively driven we made sure just by the
Yeah.
borrowing. And not by the increasing cost of operations like electricity, so we'll have to go back and double check.
Well, that's all part of the piece, isn't it? Basically, the cost of running that new house.
Oh, definitely, the increasing cost of electricity is the operating cost on the new building, so it's all part and parcel to the new building, whether it's a principal or.
I think there's some ways we can cut back on that.
I'm wondering,
The whole truck bay is lit up 24/7.
yeah.
It's not necessary.
but those are LED lights, but what's killing
Well,
you?
my son always says, well, they don't burn anything. Well, they might not burn as much, but they still burn something.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, but there are heating, there's fine tuning that, we'll be able to do.
So are there any other questions on the fire services?
I was gonna suggest before we move to the next, that we take a brief break. I don't want to take a quick break.
Sure. Let's take a break.
Right, let's take a break.
5 minutes? 10 minutes, 5?
It's still on YouTube,
YouTube,
so
yeah.
just keep in mind the room is still wired.
Yeah.
Don't say anything rude. About 8% inflation.
Are you speaking to self?
Yes. Shotgun everybody.
You can stop your video though. Stop your video and your picture.
Oh, wow, excuse me. How do you, I'm not even gonna bother asking this question, but I'm really puzzled about this, this electric, mower that Tim wants to buy in the context of our new spotless $15,000 zero turn riding mower that cuts the time of cutting grass and land from the town. We used to do, John used to do a pickup truck and a push mower and a weed whacker. 3 days a week, and you know, we have a full-time guy, fully automated. I'm just wondering why we don't cut it. I don't know, but anyway.
So I guess I haven't. I haven't got the electric mower that we're supposed to get, but it's been, there are many places that are deploying. HRM. I think they are going to use this. And me, I'm thinking, if we want to line up all our ducks in a row, that's what we should go for.
John, maybe,
Yeah.
for the robot.
Yes. Yeah. The thinking, I guess, well, we need to test it out first, home United will test it out first.
Well, I mean, if it works at HRM, it's gonna work here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, I wasn't here for that conversation when you two guys turned it down, but I think that's,
Well, we didn't really turn it down, it's not a money.
yeah.
Tim wants to apply for it.
No, I'm not saying that one,
Yeah.
but I wasn't here with the division about the.
No, we just turned down the $60,000 electric one. They've already bought the gas power, it's sitting up in the shop.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I've got one.
I'll give this back
It's
to you
just
before
not
I
electric.
steal it. Thank you so much, though.
You're welcome.
It's been, yeah, I don't know, something in this computer does not want me to have one of those.
No, we've got one. The other thing, I also don't understand is how they're gonna move the town, because I don't see anything in the budget for a trailer for the thing. We can't just drive it around the street. So we can pick you. So I don't know if that's the first thing.
I'll be.
No, those things are about, no, they'll fit on a proper full-size trailer. But don't let the wheel wells, no, they're about, I would say they're about from here to the end of the table. It's quite lovely. Our neighbor had one, it was so funny, is that Paul's has a very good friend in Toronto who's got so much money, he really doesn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And he comes to visit every now and then. And in fact, he owns 2 houses in the area now, which he never, I think he would be in. But Alan was cutting his grass one day last summer. Alex said, Alan, you're gonna kill yourself, you're gonna have a heart attack. Get in the car. And they went to the place out here, the highway, and plunked down $15,000 for one of these things. And a trailer.
Yeah.
And brought it home. And Alan used it, I think, twice. On your lawn. And he came out to our place once, it was right diagonally across my lawn, destroyed it. I had to cut it 3 times to get it straight out.
Actually.
That makes me
Going
so-
well.
I couldn't
Yeah,
stand
we're
the
good.
property,
We
because
should
it was
put
the
an
place
extra
for the
plug
trailer.
to
You guys still want to take it up?
What's that?
You know, we're still live. Betty's.
I
don't think we knew where to stop.
Now, let me see, I got the grass, I gotta get my car, I gotta drive, I gotta hook on it on the trailer, bring the trailer down, take it out the trailer, 10 minutes, the grass is gone. Take it all back and store it again, so he gave it away.
So actually, I think we're on a good
Yeah,
track.
it
I
was
want to
grand.
have at least a half hour to talk about the.
Yeah, I think we'll, it's really just water.
Yeah.
electric, so, Yeah,
Some of those.
I thought we'd be over it, done a little bit sooner.
Well,
but
that's the thing.
it's good. We've had some good conversation,
It's 111 pages.
a lot of stuff.
Well, yeah.
It looks like we're only halfway through, but we do think we'll be wrapped up by 12. We're just gonna-
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting a bit worried that we're not.
We're literally halfway through the pages, yeah.
Just try to speed it up.
Is there another piece to this thing supposed to be at the end of it? Discuss something else.
Next,
That's next week.
yeah, WSP will come to next week.
All right.
You know, make a note,
So
Sharon.
we can.
Yes, yeah, we got till 12 and we'll need it.
Yeah. She has a line.
Very
thank you.
useful.
These batteries don't last long and laptops.
Excuse me.
Anybody mind if I open your window with it?
I don't believe so.
All the windows open. Occasionally, we would do council meetings down on the waterfront in Shelburne. It was very hard to keep all the papers from blowing around, but it was really nice to be outside.
We had a little bandstand on.
That's what we did, yeah, at the Guild Hall, which is like the bandstand. We just set up a table and
I love
it
it.
was there. Of course, it's this era, we still had to record, we still had to stream. Let's figure out all those details because everybody expects that. But
Hey, wrote my bad check, and anytime you want, I got good Wi-Fi.
yeah, it's a nice place to do a meeting on a nice day.
Sounds like Kelly's.
Has to be open to the public though, so you.
Yeah. I don't know what's up with it.
Just must like dogs, right?
Oh, blind. Need some help.
What did we last time? Good to go.
We all back, yep. Perfect.
David is there, yep.
Excellent. All right, so we're gonna move on to the utilities. So we have the water utility. So we do plan on doing a rate study on the water utility, hopefully this year. But as of right now, the rates will stay the same. So we're looking at revenue for metered sales of 545. You'll be familiar with this fire protection number, the 180. You just saw it on the fire tab. Total operating revenue 737 for this year is what we're projecting. Not a lot of changes on this tab from the prior year.
Well, yeah, the main thing to point out here is the reason the revenue is staying level is that we haven't had any rate changes for last year or this year. And this year is the year that we're expected to go and do a rate study and request some changes in the coming years. And I think it's evident that all of the cost increases for things, electrical, chemicals, labor, everything over the past couple of years wasn't factored into our rates, and it, much like electrical, it will come home to roost at some point. So that rate study will inform, I'm sure an increase of some sort in next year's water rate. It doesn't stay in this type of an environment, doesn't stay at the same level. So what you'll see is a deficit, which is basically resulting from having no change on the revenue side and having increasing costs.
Is the nursing home going to make a big or noticeable impact on the water usage?
And they will be a customer, certainly a substantial customer, but the big demands, well, I mean, the capital upgrades were just to do the sprinkler system, which doesn't actually use that water. So it's tough to, hopefully. So it's tough to predict that we haven't factored in any growth due to that, but probably with half a year, I think they'll be occupied, we'll have about half a year this year. Yeah, we'll have a better idea.
Like it'd be more occupation in it too, so.
Yeah, it'll definitely use more than the previous.
Yeah.
And one of the things water rate study does, the consultants do look at that, and they may even, we may get some information from McLeod about that,
And is it possible that study, I'm assuming, but it will be able to project, for instance, how much revenue you would anticipate from additional homes being built?
Yeah, that's all part of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
we look at the stats for the past few years and figure out where it's likely to go, and it's done typically for a 3-year period.
Okay. So total pumping, we're looking at about 37,000. We'll go over again the labor and all that stuff in closed session. Of
Can I just ask a question here?
course you can.
I noticed much larger increases in power costs.
Yep.
In other places, than this is a relatively minor amount.
The power purchase, yep, so that is at the rate of 34.9.
You did budget to budget.
Oh, we did budget to budget. Okay.
Yeah, the 11.4 is budget to budget, that's what
The
it,
11 is actual budget. The 34 would be. in the
Yeah,
budget.
that's, yeah. So
Yeah,
it's-
sorry about
So it's a
that.
25% budget to budget change.
Yeah.
More than that even.
And it may be that the actual is more reflective, and that increase happened in the it is, we may be under budget on there even.
yeah, no, it's a fair point, really, if we're at 20,000, yeah.
Like,
We
I'm not
might
sure
be,
what triggered the current year actual to be as high as it is, or
Yeah.
the things that Scott associated with the project. I know we wasted a fair bit of water doing that project. That shouldn't really be on power purchase here, but so it might have been something that was a one-off, and he said, it's not come back down to the budget amount.
But if you wasted the water, you had to pump it from the lake.
No, that's what I mean. So that may be some of what's here, and he may have said that don't use the budget number instead.
if we scroll down. Under operating supplies and expenses. Sorry. Okay, so electricity, you see the 42,000, last year's 31, same deal, the 34.9. If you look at the finance software and hardware, we are going to be purchasing some new software this year, hopefully. A module in Town Suite and Megamation, and actually Megamation, we've already onboarded it. We're getting through the process of onboarding it now, but we have started that process. And that we're hoping to split with RELC, the costs. But yeah, so this will help us with our inventory. So that's the most important thing you need to know, is this will help us control and monitor our inventory a lot better. So this will be this is water. We'll be splitting in the costs and the electric, but we will also be using it for the water, for their inventory.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole work order management,
Yeah,
preventative
bespoke,
maintenance
yeah.
system, so it will benefit all the departments.
Yeah, and we haven't, inventory is fairly immaterial in the water department, but with all the projects we're doing, it is getting more material, and it's certainly something that we need to keep better controls on, like the electric utility, and make sure that we don't end up in a qualified opinion for audit time. So it is definitely something that I'm looking forward to, using these systems and making sure that we're managing this and controlling this as well as we can.
So actually, just to confirm, the costs we're seeing there, the 4,000, the 4,300 is only part of it, because the rest of it's being assigned to other.
Right, so that, exactly. So you have the use of the Town Suite. So we have 2 employees there. And then we broke out the cost of everything else between, like, the finance department, electric utility, that type of thing, all users.
So it really goes across the
Yeah.
board.
Exactly.
So,
No, you go ahead.
well, a couple things is to note that the electrical costs on this line are whatever they are, they're
So it's 31.6 times the 34.9.
42, so, you
Yeah.
know, a considerable bump here for, I'm not sure why. Compared to past,
Yeah,
but, the question I really have is about, the IT services at 20 grand.
Yep.
So we had 45,000 in town general, is that right? And the 19, so these are additive numbers.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're up around, by the time we figure out with electrical, we're probably up around $75,000 total.
yeah,
Fire service has one too.
I'm sorry.
Fire
Yeah.
service has one that wasn't.
Yeah, so it's,
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a substantial increase for sure.
Not small change.
No, that's true.
Yeah, we'll get a chance to discuss that, right?
Yeah, and then like I said, if we want to get Lisa or Leslie in here to talk about it, we can also do that.
Yeah, I would want us to talk about the increasing costs fast for us internally before we get them to.
Yeah.
So that we align. Before I go to Councillor Carver, I just had a
That's
question
okay.
around the software and hardware piece. This was in reference to some feedback on the strategic planning piece, and I think Dylan had mentioned that there will be automation where people can access their bills
Yes.
online. Would this be towards that, or?
I think it's
The customer portal's in here.
the customer portal, yeah. So I'm not sure how it works, but yeah, that will help with the automation and.
And so basically, people will get an email saying, reminder, your latest
Okay.
statement has been updated to the portal for water, electrical taxes.
And they can
Go log in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have an idea when that would be in place?
It's hard right now because I think the individual that was working on it is no longer working on it right now.
I think it'll be by the end of the first quarter. though.
Think so?
I think so. Town Suite isn't
Yeah.
always super quick, but they, I think it'll be by the end of the first quarter.
I think it's a great, and obviously as people want paper bills, we'll still provide that service if they, but I think that this is a nice way of kind of modernizing and stepping into the future for the town.
I believe so. For me personally, but I probably spend too much time asking questions of the staff there that would be saved by me just actually accessing my own bill.
Right, exactly.
Hopefully save Kim and Crystal.
But you can still call us. We
Hey,
still wholeheartedly accept calls and questions. So
The staff are gonna sit here being lonely like the Maytag man.
well, luckily I have lots of stuff for them. So.
For me, it trees them up for the heavier handling. piece.
Yeah, absolutely, we can
Just
focus.
around this and that.
Yeah, exactly. But should anybody have questions, give us a call. We're happy to.
But I like that there would be still a paper option for people who aren't.
Yeah, of
handy
course.
With the electronic stuff.
Yep.
So going back to the electricity, so what's the 136%?
So it was just another one of these things where it was that she did the 34.9% increase from the budget to budget.
But
So
then,
you look at like 31 to 42, so that's the increase, but then last year we used a different amount than what this one. And this may be an unaudited thing where actually when we go back, the other one just was misallocated. The other one was up, this one was down.
yeah.
That's why it's unaudited, so don't,
Yeah, it's hard too, because the budget is basically, we're doing it right at year end, so we're trying to get in everything, and usually it takes a couple months, so we've been trying to kind of speed it up so that our actuals are more reflective,
A
so.
lot of it is they're in, but they're just misallocated, and then over time we sort out, this.
By the time we get sort of the year end schedules populated and figure
This
it out.
breakdown, I think this breakdown is probably done by us. I don't know that the bills.
This breakdown would be done by us, yeah.
So.
Yeah, but I just mean the year end schedules, once we put it together, does it make sense? Like all that analysis we haven't had time to do yet, so yeah, if there's a misallocation, it's possible at this point. Okay, and then. So then under transportation, just a little further down. We're at 13,476. So it looks like we did some work on the truck last year, but we're looking to do some more body work on there. And so that would include the body work plus the insurance quote.
So that's also, when we get capital.
Yeah,
There's a
Or-
thought to do this now and then not buy another van
Yeah.
now. So you'll see the van reflected in the 10-year capital. But also if that, we wanted to move it forward, we could buy the van and not do this
and we'll
work.
do this.
So the proposal is just get us a little more time. That has to do with looking at the reserve levels. Well, it's not even a depreciation reserve thing, it's a surplus operating fund thing. And right now, we're presenting that as being a negative number. So if we go and we borrow for that project and rebuild that operating fund, buying a van this year would not be as untenable. But presenting it in this year now would not have been possible, so we're already in that overdrawn position on the fund.
This is kind of apocryphal, but are we in a position now, in terms of the timing, to start thinking about when we would have to replace town vehicles, starting to replace them with electric vehicles?
That's all factored into the 10-year when
Yeah.
we get there, yeah.
The 10 years good. 10 years impressive.
It's getting there, assuming that $40 million of work, so.
We've looked at the amortization of each asset as well to see when we think the useful life will be done and then whether it would actually be done. And there's good,
25% over, because we're.
yeah, there's a lot of work put into that. So it's, I think you'll be happy. Yeah, I guess happy budget might not going hand in hand.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we'll go down. If you look down, there's not much to discuss here. Everything is pretty reasonable. If we go down to the auditors, you'll see the allocation jump there. Again, the increases across all the applicable departments, utilities. Special services of 10,000, that is a water system assessment report that I guess we're getting.
Yeah, it's detailed on the operating initiative also, but
Yeah.
it's basically a mandatory system assessment report that has to be carried out for Department of Environment requirements.
So the auditor fee there, the 15,000, that's the portion that's been allocated to this, to the water utility.
Yeah. So if we have the total at
The
each,
total being,
let's just say it's 100,000.
yeah.
And then everything is proportioned based on the size, how much we think each department utility uses. So town may be like 35% and electric might be 15, or I'm just pulling numbers, but that's sort of how I'm doing it. It's a pretty simple
Yeah.
allocation. It's not too
I think
fancy.
I got that part of it. I think I'm just trying to remember the total amount, the auditor's fees.
Is it 57?
57, 59, something like that.
So it's proposed is 57.5. And then I put in 30,000 for otoscope. Not sure if it's gonna work, but you know, I like to be conservative just in case. We have 27.3 around, or 30,000, I think is what we have on our special initiatives for the internal control. So 114,000 is what we had, 114,008 is what we have in total for audit, and then that's distributed amongst the different players.
Where did
So the base fee that's been increased plus an estimated out of scope plus the additional.
Yeah, I'm basically planning for worst case scenario that we increase the base fee to not have otoscope, but then I'm planning if there is otoscope, I still want to put it in there because I don't want to short sight us on the expense. And I hope it's $30,000 less and we don't have otoscope, but I just want to play the doomsday card.
So you know, it's very often I have
Oh,
a
I know.
significant problem with that.
Yes.
And the significant problem is that the auditor will see our budget.
Yeah.
They will know we budgeted for out of scope and they will bill us for out of scope.
No, that's a
They've
fair
done the
point.
last 3 years because they know they can do that.
That's a fair point.
I don't think they'll look at the budget and I think the bill is anyway, but we can certainly talk about just taking that back down. Make a note for next week when we talk about.
Yeah, I could take the third. It's a hard situation and I've had a lot of conversations and we can discuss it further at the next meeting, but I see exactly what you're saying there.
So I would rather we say and be real that our audit fees will be 90,000. And that's what we're willing to pay as a town. And we go out in the market and do an RFP that actually says, we are looking for somebody to come and audit us, and we are realistic enough to say it will be 90,000, right? And then we get people who will give us their proposals with that in mind, rather than say, oh, we're willing to pay 50,000, but also on the side, you can give us out of scope stuff. There's another 35,000 for you to get. And
Well, we won't be going to market on this. This is already happening.
I know. And so I know this, I've said this almost every time we talked about the auditors fees, but I feel it's misrepresentation that shouldn't happen, especially auditors are supposed to be the ones who speak truth to our financial numbers. And if in the proposals that they're providing for us, truth is not in that, then I start to question everything around that particular package, right? So I would rather impacting this one, put an amount but not 30,000. Say 10,000, that would make sense
Yeah.
to a certain extent, but if you say 30,000, it's almost half.
No, I know, I was trying to base it on what we've had, what our otoscope fees have been in the last couple of years, but I see what you're saying, because we are trying to build it more into the base fee.
But maybe just like the fire chief honorarium, we will talk about changes at the next meeting.
Yeah.
We're running out of time to, if we could just park that till the next meeting, because we're not changing the numbers this meeting anyway.
Yeah.
Good conversation, good conversation.
So the punchline for this is that we do end up projecting an operating deficit in water, and that's
Yeah.
just because the revenue side hasn't changed.
Exactly, so it's really hard when expenses are going up.
Yeah, no, to that point, and I will bring this up at the end as well, but I mean, expenses in the water utility are 16% of, if you go from, I lost the page, but if you go from budget to this year's budget, it's a 48% increase, 49% increase. And if it's actual to budget, it's a 16% increase. Either way, it's a very significant change, and you know, it concerns me, and this is sort of a theme throughout.
And it mostly doesn't represent new things we've taken on. It just represents the 34% increase in electrical, 7% increase in insurance costs, it's across the board, 6.6% increase in labor.
I think everybody's feeling the pinch too, because I know Bridgewater this year put their rate up by 10 cents.
Hmm.
And it's mainly due to the water and sewer.
Yeah.
That's what
And they did it on the back of plenty of new construction and growth and assessment, and they
Yeah.
still put it up.
But
And
they said because the water and sewer changed so much.
And to be fair, the difference between the budget and the unaudited actuals are the $130,000 in depreciation, which I just noticed. So,
Mhm.
so it's really a 16% increase, but still 16% is a lot.
Yep. Okay, I'm gonna go through electrics. I know Dylan's, I'm cutting into Dylan's time here.
We'll talk more about capital next time, but I just want to.
Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, so the important things to note here is obviously I used the 34.9 for the revenue. So we're at 2.8. Before last year, we were at 2.1. If you go down to the NSPI, so last year we imported power from New Brunswick Power, so we had to pay NSPI to use their wires. So those import fees are no longer charged to us because we're going directly to NSPI right now. However, we are going to NSPI. They just had a rate increase. I've sat down with Aaron on this a few times, and looks like it's going to cost us around $2 million in expense. So that's, yeah.
So.
So in principle, if our assumption is that we get what we've asked for from the board,
Yeah,
and we don't get it,
it's gonna look
then this will look significantly different.
absolutely. So we went back, Dylan and I went back and forth on this, and I think we spoke to you guys about it too. And it's just because even Riverport maybe up until today, maybe received something. So we really had nothing to go on where the board was going. So we just said, okay, we're gonna base the assumption on we get what we asked for.
Well, there are two ways that it's different, and then Joe was, he jumped in now because he was making this point last time, but we talked in the pre-budget meeting was if our rate increase is moderated by Nova Scotia Power's rate increase being less than we had anticipated when we filed, then that's going to reflect on both the operating and both the revenue and the expenditure side.
Yeah,
So that'll flow right through. And the other thing is if they force us to phase in an increase, then effectively we've got to go borrow, and the impact on the current years,
Yeah.
you take the borrowing to make up the lost revenue. So yes, it's not, plenty of reasons why it's not good overall, but in terms of the impact in the current year, those, that should address the unpredictability of the rate decision. Note number one there, I don't have the note up on this thing, I'll just scroll down, but that's operating initiative there. I'm
Yeah.
assuming that's the one
That's the
for,
vegetation.
oh, is that the vegetation?
Yeah.
Oh, contracted services operating, okay, I was, somewhere in here, we'll have the, board had ordered us to do a number of
That's down at the
follow-up
bottom.
studies, okay.
Yeah, so we'll go down to,
One of the costs of the regulatory process.
Yeah.
So this was just vegetation.
yes. So, sorry.
Vegetation for the project.
No, this is
Oh,
just
which is-
vegetation we're behind on
Okay.
clearing out parts of town.
Making town look pretty.
Uh-huh.
Well,
Perfect.
yeah, most people would disagree that that's the outcome.
Well,
Making the town safe and the power stay on.
Yeah,
But it's line clearing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So if you go down
Oh, yeah,
to,
there's the regulatory stuff.
yeah, so then we have the auditor jump, we've kind of already covered off, so I won't get into that too much right now, but the regulatory expense that Dylan just alluded to is down at the very bottom, 91,000, that's what we're expecting. Combination of the board has required us to do several rate studies this year, or I guess not rate study. Studies, yeah, of different things, electrical, and
We're both gonna be over our heads pretty fast.
I know, this, you can tell where I struggle. And then we expect, obviously, the rate studies, some costs in there attributed, so we're looking at about 91,000, and I think that that's a fair number. I think that we need to make sure that we're, you know, bordering on cautious here, and that we, you know, what we think it's gonna cost is what we actually put in here, and, you know, these things are expensive, these.
Board always
Studies
points
are
out that
expensive.
these costs are, you know, rate-based costs, so they have been factored into the requested rates. So they're reflected here as an expenditure, they're also reflected in the projected rates. And when the board says you must do it, they also say, and your customers must pay for it, so that's
Exactly.
how it works.
Okay, so basically, I know I went through this fast because I want to give Dylan a little bit of time, but those are the main highlights of the electric utility. We're netting out to zero on this. So I think, you know, obviously keep in mind again that this is with the rates that were applied for, and, you know, who knows what they're gonna give us. But yeah, are there any questions? I know I went through that really fast.
So, no, I guess it's not a question, but a 34% increase in rates will net us zero.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's just back to break even.
And that was always that's all you can ever apply for.
Yeah.
To come back to zero.
Yeah.
But I guess we can also note here that the previous year unaudited is very inaccurate in the sense that it also was basically forced to work on assumptions. In practice, we will have a deficit in the 2022-23 year.
Absolutely.
So it's not fully reflected there, but we asked for rates effective January 1 and we didn't get them. There's no question that buying power at more than you sell it for is not a way to make money, right?
Not usually.
Yeah, so.
Do we have a sense of the board timeframe?
I mean, we really thought it would be April 1. Riverport did just get something. It's quite complex, so I don't want to try to interpret it this morning. We just saw it yesterday. But they were 2 weeks before us, so I guess hopefully next year.
Just shy of our budget, but we finished the budget. Yeah, I love,
Change the whole budget on that basis. I guess we'll have to decide. I mean, a budget is an estimate, you know, it's just a working.
yeah, we'll see what the actual, so. But yeah, I don't know if Dylan, you wanted to.
Well, I mean,
into-
cemetery, well, you want to briefly speak to the cemetery, I guess, even.
So
though-
the only thing I wanted to comment about the cemetery really is the grants from the town. So the prior 22, 23 and 2 years before that, the grants had not actually been paid. So you can see there, it's quite substantial. The Park Cemetery 35-1, that's 3 years worth of grants being paid. So for whatever reason, it fell off.
I think you guys will all remember Councillor Feeney making reference to making sure we go back and dot our i's and cross our t's, because any surpluses in cemetery were meant to be transferred to perpetual care, but they're falling back into general operating fund. So this 29,000 in last year's surplus is a $29,000 contribution to perpetual care, basically. So we're addressing that. And this was discussed in the pre-budget meeting 2 weeks ago, but this is how you see it
Yeah.
coming
exactly.
through there to those balances we'd already presented 2 weeks ago. This is how you get them.
Yep, and same thing with the Bayview Cemetery, so we have the $42,000 and you see the $21,000 surplus for the year.
Goal with all these cemetery surpluses is to build that perpetual care fund to a place where
Sustainable,
it can actually generate enough money to pay for day-to-day operations.
That'd be great, so.
We've made a lot of progress.
Yeah, I think so. Okay,
All right, so we'll be pretty quick on these last parts. I know we still have 37 pages there, but or 47 pages. Anyway, so this is operating, the top is old, it should be 23, 24, but this is the special projects page. We've already looked through all these, but I just want to point them out real quick here. So the blue column is the total overall external, internal, multi-year total. But the first column, 23-24 cost budget is what's in this year. So you'll look at Plan Mahone Bay, it's good update. The first one, MPS LUB update Plan Mahone Bay. It's an $80,000 project, as we reported on a couple weeks ago. That's the current amount, 80,000. And out of that, there's 49 that's been spent, and 31 still anticipated to be spent this year. So the part that was in the operating budget for this year is 31. But this sheet is here so that you can see all of those connections. And you can also see the external funding for certain projects, which is not many of them. But the accessibility audits, for example, I mentioned. And so all that's reflected in the operating is the 20. It doesn't reflect the contribution of 21,000 from Communities, Culture and Heritage, but that would be a net in out. We didn't reflect it as an expenditure or a revenue. So you can look down through these at your discretion. They're all the same things. It's important to note on the far right-hand side that it does show a linkage to the strategic plan. So these are all like, every one of these is essentially something that was in the strategic plan as council during this term wants to complete these initiatives. And they're all operating reserve funded. So like Councilor Carver said earlier, we put money in the operating reserve knowing we had expenses, and they didn't all get incurred when we thought they would. Some of them carried forward, but the money was still put into the operating reserve for these expenses. So I think that's, unless there's questions.
This isn't the 10-year plan then.
No, this is just operating.
That's right. Yeah, just-
so these you'll see throughout the actual budget
Operating,
as
good.
well, yeah.
So what didn't get done last year? Was that noted?
Yeah, so what they did on last year, basically, if you look at the fifth column of numbers in town cost 2022, 23 budget, and then next to it, the fourth one is actual. So if we budgeted in many of these cases, 25,000, 5,000, like goes the budget, and we didn't spend anything. So you can see mostly these projects just didn't happen. And the housing strategy didn't happen because we're waiting for the province. The urban forest master plan didn't happen because we got to the end of our data collection, but we decided to just start into the next phase in the spring with students. Logo, as you know, we just haven't spent money yet, and maybe we're not going to spend that much. That'd be great. Accessibility audits got carried forward to seek external funding. So there's always a reason, but many of these haven't done start last year. And we got to get them done by the end of council term, so they're on here as things to do. And a lot of the staff turnover the last couple of years didn't necessarily help with moving some of these forward, although they're mostly externally driven. So this sheet is the money that is dedicated to the funding of capital, and always, I think, Councillor Feeney's favorite one. So we show the infrastructure charges revenue coming in, that's dedicated to capital. The transfer tax, again, Ashley's estimate is conservative, 230,000. Gas tax is a set amount we receive. And then we subtract from this principal and debt charges to the town for things that we're going to see in the debt schedule, but we previously owed for. Contribution to town equipment reserve has been a set amount. It's just by practice. We're not accountable to anybody on that. That's just what we've done year over year. Wastewater reserve, similarly, we started that a couple of years ago. We're just trying to have a predictable contribution. Definitely, if you look at the expenses coming, both of them would need to be much higher if we were going to cover everything out of those reserves, but ultimately it's a discretion because those are all part of town general. They're not separate utilities or anything. Nothing the town operating reserve, that was the 150,000 we discussed. We just didn't think it was necessary this year based on the reserve levels. Contribution to recreation reserve, that's the new one at 15,000. And so that amounts to the total or the net of 452,000 income to the capital, and that's shown in the status of fund sheet previously. And it's shown here just because it gives a little context to the upcoming sheets, and we're not gonna go through these sheets one by one. So if you don't want to flip to the next one, I'll just explain. So this is how the current year's capital projects are listed. And then the 10 years after this, and I actually think the 10 year is more illustrative of where these all fit together. But then when you want to see more information about each of them, that was already too big of a spreadsheet. We couldn't possibly accommodate in there a breakdown of internal and external costs, so that the 10 year overstates, it says this is the cost. It doesn't say how much is going to be covered by external sources. So when you look at the 10 year, like, oh wow, it's $40 million of stuff, but actually we usually get about half of that from external sources overall. So this current year breaks that down, and it also does a few other interesting things, like elaborating on the external. Some of these projects I say are contingent on external. So if it's got the red highlighted line, it will see in a few places. My point there is to say, and yeah, this is a good example, Edgewater Shoreline Phase 2. So this would be like the design work, just engineering, for the big remaining section from the end of the parking lots. So there's a section we've already got separated to hopefully do this year up to the end of the parking lots, but then the rest of it from there down to Keddy's, it would only happen if we successfully secure, I'm saying approximately 75% external funding. We've always talked about this project won't happen without external funding. So it's in here, but I wanted to be clear that those type of things are not in here saying we're going to do them regardless. They're in here if we successfully secure external funding. And we've written to the province about that as well. So do you want to just flip back up to the top where the other thing that is highlighted? So the other type of thing that was highlighted, just up to the first of these.
Oh,
sheets.
the mark, yeah.
Yeah, so the other one is this blue highlighting, and I put that on the names. This is things that are eligible for the new Sustainable Services Reserve, the 271,000 that the province slipped into our account. That part is, I didn't put anything as drawing on it, but I wanted council to know where these do impact the capital reserve, they would actually potentially instead impact that new money. So we don't have to think that the capital reserve, which is shown as being drawn down quite a bit, well, it can be drawn down by as much as $271,000 less. We have eligible projects. So I just wanted to kind of point out what some of the projects that would be eligible for that funding are. And so you'll see there's a couple that are highlighted. The Edgewater active transportation trail, multi-use trail, that was highlighted. Accessibility upgrades to comfort stations, that was highlighted. So if we choose to, in the full run of this budget, those could be specifically allocated to draw some of that money from the new provincial reserve. So in the end, I think we've got 40, 45, one more page, 44, and the numbers missing from the pool now. Got 44 that are in the general section, and the general section, all of these are either a works project, administration, transportation, wastewater, essentially everything except for fire, water, and electrical. So those 44 projects are all together there, everything except for fire, water, and electrical. And the other thing I just want to mention before we move on to this first one is the funding sources are all shown. So if you see it says, capital reserve, this one, that's shed $4,000, that's the capital reserve. So when you look back on the status of fund sheet, Ashley has mapped all of those costs to the appropriate reserve. So you can see if we did everything here, what the reserve balances would be is what appears in that already in that projection on the status of funds at the beginning. So it is already assuming we do everything here. The thing it is not showing is that some of these are earmarked as borrowing. And so if it's earmarked as borrowing, it's not impacting on the reserve levels, but it will impact on our debt load and future debt service costs. So council needs to contemplate if those projects would be financed by borrowing. That's what we're proposing. Typically, our guideline around borrowing is we usually do it for some larger projects that are going to last, that are, not carried out too frequently, and especially if they're an externally funded project like a major water line, wastewater line upgrade. So I follow that principle here, but I did want to point out that there are two kind of areas we group together for possible borrowing and other than those externally funded projects. One is a series of interrelated improvements on Fairmont Street. Last year, we had a drainage on Fairmont and Pine Grove as a planned project. That's been carried forward. Public Works is recommending some sidewalk and road work as well on Fairmont. So we kind of took all those things in the same area and said, that's one thing. It appears as 3 projects, but it's one thing. And we would recommend borrowing for that collection of things. And the other one that is like that is the 3 projects centered around this building that were also raised last year. The electrification of the building, the improvement to the parking in addition of a crossing outside, and the exterior of this building. So that would be another group of things that are recommended for borrowing. So there's a lot of projects and you'll need to go through, and we'll have a session to talk in more detail. At the end of each section, so at the end of general, at the end of water, at the end of electrical, you see this breakdown: capital reserves, equipment reserve, recreation reserve, borrowing, MFC, gas tax reserve, external sources. So that's how, all of those 44 projects above, collectively, that's how that $3.995 million would be generated. That's where it would come from. And remember, some of that would only happen if the external funding is secured. So water and electrical are much the same, and fire are much the same. We've got 4 projects under fire, some of them from fire equipment reserves, so like the purchase of the truck, some of them borrowing MFC. The distinction here in the borrowing for fire, I'd love not to present it as borrowing, but we will get to a point on the purchase of the new pumper where there will have to be some borrowing based on the current reserve level. So that's where this starts to factor in that we will have to have some borrowing for the truck. It wouldn't actually be in this year. It would actually be 2 years down the road. But we've shown project in this year, so just know the borrowing will happen eventually once the truck is actually here. So water, I think we've got 15, maybe. Oh,
Getting back to the truck. We have to pay for the chassis when it arrives, which I'm assuming will probably be in about 8 or 9 months.
yeah, that'll be this.
So that's going to reserve.
Yeah, so it would just come out of operating funds. We just kind of balancing all the different things in the operating account. And I think we can accommodate that without setting up a short-term borrowing facility for it. So we'll just cover it in the interim until the
Yeah.
truck actually arrives, and then we'll
Substantial amount of money.
sort it all out when we get there. Yeah, no, it will be. And I mean, if necessary, we could take money out of the reserve just for cash flow, but we want to put it back.
That's not bad.
Thank you. So I'm just wondering about how the process unfolds in terms of discussing all these various proposed projects.
So I think
For example, I'm just wondering about the item for the Main Street Edgewater intersection, and I just lost where it is, but it said $30,000 allocation. And there's some reference to the report from WPS.
WSP. So they're going to present at our next budget session, but my thought was capital would be probably on the 28th. We'd have a better discussion on the 28th.
Okay, so that's when we get to look at the actual proposal and to.
We'll get the proposal next Friday, and they'll actually come. Patrick's going to.
Oh, they're coming, okay, that's the
And then
traffic,
in the following week,
that's the traffic.
that's the traffic.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is a specific, it's about the turning area, it's number 13. At town limits on Como Road, the turning area to facilitate snow.
Yeah, it's, I mean, again, I think we need to probably a whole meeting to go over all these in
Okay.
detail, but
Yep.
there's an issue that is intended to address.
Okay.
Yeah,
So this today was just to give us a lay of
Yeah,
what this talks about, and then.
Yeah, what are these
Yeah,
sheets?
what
How
are
do
these
you
sheets?
read them?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, on the 28th, we'll mostly do capital.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
next week, we'll get into the closed session, look at the personnel's detail, and that stuff. Have WSP come in, make these changes to fire honorarium and things we talked about. And then the following one, we'll really dig into.
great,
this.
thank you, okay.
So there's 16 in water, and I think electrical had a similar number. So overall, it is, I mean, it's a very, very full capital program. This is where I think turnover of staff has mattered, because we've, like water, wastewater, we had lots of projects we didn't do. So that we had staff turnover. Now we've got staff to a place where this year they want to get this stuff done. They really want to hit the ground running. But what that means is we have even more projects than we had last year. And as this budget details, we can pay for them, but it's a time of growth and expenditure in Mahone Bay. And I think it's, just making up for underinvestment over previous years, and so that's what you'll see here. So this is all further summarized in the 10-year, so that's the next one. Oh, and let's quickly, are those okay? Are those accurate? Okay, let's quickly show. So this is the external internal funds breakdown. So you'll see that it is slightly skewed. We like to get 50-50 at least. We got more town funds to external than I would like to see. And unfortunately, that represents a couple of things, some major expenditures that we've had to go forward with without external funding. We talked a little bit about that water project, but there's also the fire station has been one of those projects that wasn't really significantly externally funded. But this also represents, like I said, a lot of small things that need to get done, pavement maintenance, that type of stuff that it's funded through gas tax, for example, and that new reserve is going to support some of that improvements to active transportation. But those are not shown as external here. This is grant-based, application-driven external. So if the gas tax comes in, we don't count that as external, but it is coming from an external source. And then the next pie chart. So this is the further breakdown of where these costs are being paid for, from our own, some from reserve, some from borrowing.
If I may, I just want to go back to the specific item of the reconfiguration of Edgewater Main intersection, because we know that this item is of considerable interest to the public. So if I'm understanding what we're saying here is that council will get information from the engineers next Friday. And then the following Friday, council will actually discuss that proposal and evaluate whether or not we want to go ahead with whatever they're proposing.
We'll just discuss if the budget would be adequate to what possible outcome we might
Possible
see happen.
outcome.
Yeah, we're not looking for a decision on the design next week. What they're presenting to us next week is a concept report with 3 possible concepts. I think it's actually 5 because there's like 1A, 1B, but and then council is basically being asked if you have from these a design that you want to proceed with, and whether we feel that that is a process to determine that requires additional time and discussion on our part. Is that just council's discretion? What's in the budget here is just engineering work. So, but presumably if we do pick one, we then go and do the design on it. So that's what would be envisioned in here. And the 10-year actually better illustrates that because it shows how there's next year there would be a construction part,
So where does the Plan Mahone Bay come into discussing these changes?
Plan Mahone Bay is just land use, so it doesn't.
So it doesn't have the, so that last page on the mayor's newsletter had like where the work is to be done, and
So that's not anything to do with
So
Plan Mahone
that's
Bay, it's
not-
just us talking about upcoming projects.
okay. So will there be an input for town people?
I would say when you receive the concept report next week, that's the beginning of council's discussion about what process you want to see to select an eventual design. Like, we're not pushing that, this is the budget, so the budget has to say, like, we expect a design, and there will be engineering, and then there will be construction, but we don't know what. Yeah, and actually, if you look at the construction, if I get to the 10-year, it's less than some of the options. So I've said many of these options could be accommodated within this budget, but there is at least one option that will be more than that. And if council likes that option, we'll have to revise that budget, but it would be next year's. It wouldn't be this year's, it would be next year's budget. That's not that.
So if I'm understanding Mr. Hyde correctly, that we're going to be presented with options and at a basic level. Am I understanding correctly that council has already committed to some change at that intersection?
So can I jump in? Your question is about public participation
In
when the
part.
report comes
In
to the
part, yeah.
table. And so you're wondering, how will the public get to participate if council is making a decision on the
In part.
report that will come, right? So I think what I'm getting from the CAO is that there would be a report that will come to council, and then council will determine the process after that. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah, so in many ways, we will get a report from WSP, which has already been contracted by the town. And then we as a team of 7 people will decide, these folks, I'll say, I don't know who WSP is, these folks have told us, these might be the things we'll consider. This is what we're willing to take on, and then we can decide how do we take them on. Do we want to go back to the public and sort of say, well, what do you think about this? Do you want to actually say, well, we can do these things and actually take them on? So from my perspective, we're waiting for a report. There's no decision made, at least not from my understanding. We will make a decision going forward, what actually makes sense for us. We might get the report that is already paid for a lot of money and decide, no, we're not gonna do anything, but we know what can be done, right?
So they'll give us 5 options, as the CAO said.
Yeah.
But we also have the option of do nothing.
Exactly.
Okay.
we do, and I don't want to belabor the point, but as the traffic authority, I strongly recommend against that option, and I don't think today is the time to get into
No,
that.
exactly.
Not without Joe.
No, and I wanted to be sure, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for that clarification or with that explanation. Because I just wanted to be sure that whoever's watching out there, that understanding is there. Thank you.
I think the best way to characterize is that we acknowledge that the intersection does require a review, and the review is just at its initial stages.
Yeah, and that concern has been brought about a few times by citizens asking questions about the.
Absolutely, and by our police advisory board.
Exactly.
So the 10-year, I'm not gonna, but just, this is our effort to really map out, like we said, how do we know what vehicles need to be replaced when? Upcoming expectations of water, wastewater investment. This is far from complete. We're gonna keep working on this year. This is gonna get better and better, but it's still 170 projects over the next 10 years. So it's quite substantial. It includes replacement of vehicles. There's a commentary there about electric vehicles. So the commitment that we've made is electric by 2030. So that's what this generally is intended to show. So if there's a vehicle that's being replaced towards the end of this time, it is to be replaced with, this is for small vehicles, 2030, not the backhoe or anything. But it is supposed to be an electric purchase. So the costs here are reflective, not necessarily one we're buying right now, because they're not good for 10 years, but one we're buying closer to the end of that period. And when on the 28th, we can certainly dig into a lot of these things, but I should point out that only the 23-24 is actually being mapped through to the budget. The other stuff is for context.
Yeah.
But most of the context I wanted to show here is things like the very first one there, Public Works Garage. I know we don't know what we're doing, but this is a budget. So in a budget, what we like to show is that last year we spent $29,000 figuring out what we're doing. So that's in there. And this year I'm expecting that whatever we pick, we're probably going to spend $100,000 following up on that, getting it engineered, getting it out to tender, getting people on board to manage the project, whatever we're going to do. And then the following year likely is when construction will actually happen. Now, if we choose renovation of the existing building, you know, this may not work out exactly this way. These numbers are just here to provide us with some context, but I think we know that a lot of the options are about 1.5 million, so that's what I've used. And as you go down, you know, reconfiguration Edgewater Main is number 20 here. And it's got WSP costs this year, anticipated design costs, and then anticipated costs to actually change, to actually do any work on the intersection. But that's just an estimate. It's in 24-25. So we're just trying to show there will be, if we do something, there will be a cost. And so I'm not going to go down through all these, but I think we've done a good job of fleshing them all out. And I thank you actually for stopping on this one, because I did want to note recreation and culture really does show. We talk about town contributions to recreation and culture, and here we have $1.3 million of recreation and cultural investment over the 10 years. So it's certainly not nothing. Yeah, I think that's it for the 10-year, and then you can flip. We're coming right up on 12. I'm going to try to hit that button as close again. So grants is the last piece. So this one, you all will be forwarded the actual applications. And we probably won't decide on these grants until at least the 28th, maybe the fall, maybe if we have one more of that, but it's usually the last thing. But some of these groups are waiting to hear. So if council, feels comfortable to do so, we can get back to these folks sooner. But essentially what we've done is we've specified here what we did last year, whether there was an application received, whether there was amount specified, actually summarized. Some of them that say unspecified were just complex. They didn't say an amount, they said a lot of amounts, that they couldn't easily be boiled down to one line. So you'll all have all the application detail to read through. So I'm not gonna go into it in too much detail. I am gonna flag the one that is most jumping out on the page, because I think I have to, it's half of the total budget. Mahone Bay Center Society has a proposal about paving parking at the center. It is now shared parking with our sports field. I think the total cost is more in the $60,000 range, it's detailed in this. The town is asked to make a contribution. It is difficult to determine as a staff person where council's gonna feel about the appropriate level of that contribution. So I have put it down at what was approximately a 33% contribution to the project. The thought being they go to maybe MODL and then fundraise the remainder. It's not gonna be easy to come up with that money on their part, but I didn't necessarily think I should presuppose a larger amount. So when you read it all, we can give them less, we can give them more, There's plenty of discussion, that's not set. I just, I know council last year wanted me to come up with an estimate, so big jump from 10 to 45,000. A lot more interest this year, a couple of really specific proposals, and obviously highly distorted by that one $22,000 number.
So it just, you mentioned about us not discussing this until the 28th.
Well, I mean, we can discuss them next week. I just don't want to push council to. So if anyone wants to bring anything up next week and say, can we get an authorization for this one? That's fine. That's not inappropriate. It just.
But there wouldn't be anything preventing us from discussing it at the next budget meeting.
So, and if people say here today, look, we really do feel there's nothing to stop us from reading this package that will be sent out and having a discussion on grants at the next meeting in order to expedite getting back to people.
Yeah.
We can actually just anticipate that will be on the next meeting.
Councilor Campbell?
A question about senior safety and because last year we decided that that amount was going to go into the regular budget out of whatever it was.
Yeah, I think that's what happened.
Yeah, so where is it actually in the budget?
Actually, you can either try to know now if you know, or.
I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. Just
Yeah.
wanted to be sure it's there.
Yeah, no problem.
And can I add to that?
Yeah.
And is that the contribution that our allotment from the town of Mahone Bay that's in their budget, right? Okay,
Yes.
so it's more than what the.
Oh, yeah, there's $1,000, what that is.
Yeah.
But no, the regular 25 plus whatever, yeah, 25,000 or plus.
Before we go, do we have a summary page showing income, expenses and changes from last year?
You have for the town.
Yeah. for the
Yeah,
town.
on the very, yeah, right at the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah. I can show
So
you.
before you flip back, I'm just gonna say the next two are only restatements of information already included in the budget.
Yes, yeah,
So the subsidies, this is not extra, this is already in.
Yeah.
It's just, we previously wanted to break it out so people could see more transparently some of that. Maybe we do that, maybe we don't do that, but that's what we've got here. I don't know why the museum budget dropped so precipitously though. I think that might just be a typo. Oh, here's senior safety, but that doesn't tell you where it is. It's senior safety is in here, but this is also mapped to somewhere else in the budget.
Oh, where?
This is subsidies, it's page 110. But it lists it as 1,000, confirming that it's in there, but that still is on a different line item.
But there's a 25,000 or more somewhere else.
For senior safety?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, the mandatory contribution part, yeah, well, actually, we'll have to find.
yeah, let me take a peek.
I don't know why the museum is showing.
There's a lot of pages. I will get back
But
to you.
anyway,
about
this is
it.
just a restatement, it's just a restatement, and the last page is also just a restatement, and that's on the tax exemptions.
Yeah,
And it just shows the breakdown of
Great,
all the
that
things
I'm
we talked about previously. So you can flip back to the summary now for.
Yeah, if you don't, just for a minute.
yeah.
So I'm just gonna make my much anticipated speech. Now we have a 21 point something percent change in revenue. All driven by assessment. As I understand it, because there's no change in rate. Essentially. And I'm guessing that we spent it all.
Close to it.
Okay.
Which
Which,
$131,000.
yeah, so. And this isn't really a question, but we went through this again last year as well, and, you know, we have or 7.6 or something odd % increase in the cost of living. And I recognize completely that there's pent up demand and there's all kinds of reasons why we could spend that huge amount of money. But I also recognize that it's becoming increasingly difficult for folks to match their budget to their income, if I could put it that way. And it would be, I think it's important to us, I think our responsibility is to try and get that increase in costs down to something closer to the level of inflation. Whether last year, I think we landed on 11% in a 6% inflationary world. I guess I could live with 8 or 9% this year, but I really am uncomfortable with a 20% increase in year-over-year costs. So that's it.
Great. The question I have for you, do you have suggestions around which areas can be trimmed down when you look at?
Well, maybe bring those next week.
Yeah.
It's 111 pages.
He only just got.
Just as we task staff to actually think about those, it's also might be important for us to think about, okay, so where do we think we can trim so that they have because it's difficult for them to make those decisions about where we can trim, and then we will have those conversations when we get to trying to trim it down.
Because we all have our pet projects.
Exactly.
Well,
A lot of those does represent those.
my first stop after here is to go buy some printer ink.
We'll print this for you.
Yeah.
Well, we nearly hit the 12 noon
Yeah,
mark.
that's good. Mayor, do you have any parting comments, questions? We haven't heard from you yet today. You're on mute.
You're still on mute.
I didn't have you all on one screen, so I had to move the little pictures up and down. I'm going to be curious to look through the numbers again with material when we get it, and referring to the notes that I've made. I'm a little concerned about some of the increases. Some of them we can do nothing about. You know, the costs of some of our supports, services we provide, or certainly services we consume, the cost is what it is. There are very few areas, I think, where we have any flexibility. But I think we need to look at those and try to keep the budget as tidy and as consistent and constant as it has been in the past. I'll be curious to participate in the discussions on the next couple of Fridays to see where the devils are hidden in all of these details.
Great. Looking forward to it. Well, we've come to it.
Everybody's got some reading material.
Yeah.
A little light reading for the weekend.
And if you have questions on explaining what you're looking at when you're at home, obviously send them through to us and we'll do it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, I must admit, it's getting better handling the budget, and the layout is getting, from my perspective, much better. I understand things much better than the very first one, which was very tough to get through.
And we're not in July this year.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Yeah.
Appreciate the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, thank
behind
you.
the scenes to make this happen, and hopefully soon we'll have a budget to turn off. Motion to adjourn.
Motion.
By Councillor.
The mayor was.
Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Carver. On the question. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, folks. See you, David.
Thank you, see you later.
Okay.
Take care, David.
Bye, David.
See you later.
Thank you.
Um,